"You are not half the woman your sister is," my mother said at Thanksgiving dinner, her wineglass raised in a toast to her golden child. I looked around the lavish dining room of the Atlanta townhouse, wiped my mouth with a linen napkin, and calmly pushed my chair back. "Then she can start paying your rent." My father turned pale. "Rent? What rent?" Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind your toxic family exactly who holds the keys to their kingdom. My name is Simone. I am 32 years old, and for my entire life, I have been treated as the family disappointment. We were gathered in the dining room of my parents' upscale Atlanta home, surrounded by fine china that my mother Evelyn could not afford. The smell of roasted turkey and collard greens filled the air, masking the suffocating tension that accompanied our family holidays. At the head of the table sat Preston, my white brother-in-law, swirling bourbon like he was the master of the house. He and my sister Chloe had just announced their brilliant new real estate venture. Evelyn was practically glowing with pride, hanging on to his every word. To Chloe and Preston, Evelyn beamed, tapping her spoon against her glass to demand everyone's attention. A true power couple. They are building a legacy, investing and making major moves. Unlike some people who are perfectly fine settling for a life of complete mediocrity. She turned her gaze to me, looking me up and down with blatant disgust. I was wearing a simple black dress, keeping my profile deliberately low-key. To Evelyn, my lack of flashy designer labels meant I was still the same struggling girl I was in my early 20s. She truly thought my daily job as an administrative assistant was a miserable dead end. She had no idea that I was a senior partner at Vanguard Equity managing billion-dollar portfolios while she lived off maxed-out credit cards and dangerous loans. "Look at you, Simone." Evelyn sneered, her voice cutting through the festive jazz playing in the background. 32 years old, pushing papers at some desk job, wearing clothes from last season. "Look at your sister. She is a powerhouse building an empire. You are not half the woman your sister is." Chloe smirked, flipping her expensive extensions over her shoulder, while Preston let out a patronizing chuckle. He leaned back, resting his arm casually across Chloe's chair, exuding that arrogant, unearned privilege he always weaponized against my parents. "Now, Evelyn, do not be too hard on her," Preston said, his tone dripping with deep condescension. "Not everyone has the mind for high-level investments or the grit it takes to build real wealth. The corporate grind is a safe place for people who just need direction. Someone has to answer the phones, right?" I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not give them the emotional reaction they were so desperately craving. Instead, I reached into my tote bag, pulled out a manila folder, and dropped it onto the center of the Thanksgiving table. The heavy thud made the crystal glasses rattle and the silverware clink loudly. "Then she can start paying your rent," I said, my voice dangerously steady and calm. The table went completely silent. The jazz music suddenly felt far too loud. My father Marcus, who had spent the entire evening staring quietly at his plate to avoid any conflict, suddenly dropped his fork. The color drained completely from his weary face. "Rent. Simone, what rent? We own this house. We have lived here for 20 long years." "You lost this house 3 years ago, Dad," I replied, looking directly at Evelyn, whose face was rapidly shifting from confusion to sheer panic. Mom maxed out 3 different mortgages to fund her country club lifestyle, to keep up appearances with her wealthy friends, and to pay for Chloe's massive destination wedding. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings 36 months ago. You were exactly 1 week away from having your belongings thrown out onto the street. Evelyn leaped up, knocking her wineglass over. The red liquid spilled across the pristine white tablecloth. "Shut your mouth. You are lying. You are just jealous because your sister is successful and married a good provider, and you are a miserable failure. How dare you ruin Thanksgiving with these malicious lies?" "I am a failure." I laughed, a sharp, cold sound that echoed off the ceiling of the dining room. "I bought this house from the bank at auction in cash. I set up a blind limited liability company to conceal my identity, so you would not have a heart attack from the profound humiliation of knowing your failure of a daughter bailed you out. I let you live here rent-free for 3 years because I pitied you, and I wanted Dad to have a peaceful retirement. You are sitting in my dining room eating turkey at my table under my roof. Chloe slammed her hands on the table, her designer bracelets clanking against the wood. You are insane, Simone. You are having a psychological breakdown. Preston and I just looked at the property records last week. This house is free and clear. There is plenty of equity in it. Preston stood up, towering over the table with a smug, deeply condescending smile. He reached into his suit jacket, acting as if he was dealing with a confused child. Simone, sweetheart, you really should not play real estate games you do not understand. My family has real corporate lawyers. I know exactly who owns this house. He pulled out a crisp notarized document and tossed it onto the table right next to my manila folder. This is a deed of trust, he announced proudly. I used the equity in this property to secure the funding for our new startup. You cannot own the house because I already leveraged it. The bank approved the massive loan yesterday. I am the legal guarantor of this estate now. He stood there waiting for me to break down, expecting me to cower before his supposed legal and financial superiority. He thought his tailored suit and his arrogant confidence would intimidate me into silence, just like it intimidated my parents. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I unlocked the screen, opening the secure encrypted portal for my private equity firm. A slow smile spread across my face as I looked up at Preston's triumphant expression. That is funny, I said, leaning forward, looking him dead in the eye. Because my lawyer just sent me the bank alerts and they tell a very different story. Julian thrashed on the cold marble floor of the reception hall, clutching his chest and screaming for a doctor. He writhed in his tailored tuxedo, purposely knocking over a towering centerpiece of white orchids, trying to draw the eyes of every wealthy guest in the room away from me. Please, somebody help me, he gasped dramatically, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. She is hysterical. The stress of the wedding has completely broken her mind. Do not listen to a single word she says. Just get medical help right now. His performance was truly worthy of an Oscar, but I was not going to let this cheap distraction work. I did not rush to his side to play the role of the panicked, devoted bride. Instead, I gathered the heavy silk of my wedding gown, stepped right over the scattered white orchids, and moved closer to the edge of the stage. The murmurs of the 200 guests fell into a stunned, heavy hush. The elite crowd of Atlanta high society men in bespoke suits and women dripping in diamonds stared at me, waiting to see if I would crumble under the pressure. I stood tall, holding the microphone with an iron grip. My voice echoed through the massive ballroom, cutting effortlessly through his fake groans. Before I could utter another syllable, heavy footsteps pounded up the side stairs of the stage. Harrison, his older brother, stormed toward me. His face was flushed crimson with rage, matching the exact color of his designer pocket square. He was a foot taller than me, and he used every inch of that height to try and physically intimidate me. He stepped so close I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath, his massive frame deliberately blocking my view of the audience. "Give me that microphone right now," Maya Harrison snarled, keeping his voice low enough that only I could hear the absolute venom in it. "You are humiliating yourself, and you are humiliating our entire family. You need to step down from this stage, shut your mouth, and walk out the back door before I call the police and have you arrested for slander. You are ruining a multi-million-dollar merger with your crazy paranoid delusions. I will see you locked up for this. I will make sure you never work in this city again." I looked up at Harrison, unblinking. I did not step back. I did not cower. I simply smiled, raised my free hand, and pushed his chest out of my way with surprising force. I walked right past him, stepping to the very front of the stage, so there was absolutely nothing between me and the front row of tables. The front row was specifically reserved for the primary investors of Vanguard Holdings, the exact people Julian needed to impress today to secure his massive corporate merger. I looked directly at Richard Sterling, the lead investor, who was sitting with his wife, tightly clutching a glass of champagne. "Richard," I said, my voice crystal clear over the state-of-the-art sound system, "Julian wants you to believe I am a hysterical bride suffering from wedding day stress. But the truth is, you are all sitting in the middle of an elaborate stage play. This entire wedding, this luxurious ballroom, the imported caviar, the designer suits, it is all a carefully constructed facade designed exclusively to secure your merger funds today." The ballroom erupted into panicked whispers. Harrison lunged forward to grab my arm, but my private security team, whom I had quietly hired and stationed around the perimeter, stepped out of the shadows and blocked his path. Two large men in black suits grabbed Harrison by the shoulders, pinning him back. I turned my attention back to the investors, ensuring every word landed with maximum impact. His family estate. The one he claims is the bedrock of his generational wealth went completely bankrupt 2 years ago, I announced to the shocked crowd. The properties he listed on his asset portfolio were quietly seized by the bank. The vintage luxury cars parked outside this venue are rented by the hour. The massive family trust he constantly brags about at your country club dinners does not exist. You are about to hand $50 million to a man who cannot even afford the deposit on the tuxedo he is wearing right now. Julian stopped writhing on the floor. He sprang to his feet, the sudden miraculous cure of his fake heart condition proving my point entirely. His face was twisted in absolute fury, losing all traces of his charming Southern gentleman persona. He grabbed a spare microphone from the DJ booth and shouted over the rising panic of the crowd. "She is lying. She is a bitter gold-digging liar. Do not listen to her, Richard. She has absolutely no proof of any of this. She is just a lowly accountant who barely understands how a basic spreadsheet works. She knows nothing about high-level corporate finance or how real business is done. She is trying to ruin me because I asked for a prenuptial agreement this morning." I let his desperate insults wash over me. The crowd looked back and forth between us, waiting for the final blow. The silence in the room was deafening as I reached into the bodice of my gown and pulled out a folded piece of heavy stock paper. I held it up high for the investors to see, the official seal stamped at the bottom. "You are right, Julian," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "I am an accountant, but I am not just a lowly accountant. You told Richard and the board that your company financials were completely solid because they were thoroughly vetted by an elite anonymous third-party auditing firm out of Chicago. I know, because that anonymous third-party auditing firm you hired to vet your company is owned entirely by me alone." The paramedics burst through the front doors, boots pounding against the hardwood floor, shattering the remaining tension in the dining room. I stepped back, giving them room to work as they loaded my father onto the stretcher and rushed him out into the cold November night. I did not bother looking at Preston or Chloe or my mother. I just grabbed my keys and followed the flashing lights all the way to Atlanta General Hospital. The harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room waiting area buzzed above me, casting long shadows across the sterile linoleum floor. I sat in a plastic chair, staring at the double doors of the surgical wing, waiting for any news. 30 minutes later, the sliding doors to the main lobby hissed open, and my mother made her grand entrance. She was not alone. Evelyn had brought an entire congregation of judgment with her. She had called the influential church aunties. Sister Beatrice, Aunt Vonda, and Miss Clara marched into the waiting room like a tribunal, forming a tight wall of faux fur coats and self-righteous indignation around my mother. Evelyn was putting on the performance of a lifetime, leaning heavily on Aunt Vonda's arm, clutching a tissue to her chest, and sobbing without producing a single actual tear. She pointed a manicured finger directly at me the moment she saw me sitting there. "There she is!" Evelyn wailed, her voice echoing off the hospital walls. "The daughter who put her own father in the surgical ward." The aunties swarmed me immediately, trapping me in the corner of the waiting area. They looked at me with deep disappointment, the same look they gave me when I was a teenager, refusing to conform to their strict, outdated standards. Aunt Vonda shook her head, crossing her arms over her chest. "Simone, you should be ashamed of yourself," she scolded, her tone dripping with condescending authority. "A child is supposed to honor her mother and father. Your parents gave you life, and you repay them by causing a scene at Thanksgiving dinner, bringing stress into their home, and giving that poor man a heart attack." Sister Beatrice chimed in right behind her. "We always knew you had a rebellious spirit, Simone, always acting too smart for your own good, always making things difficult, while your sister Chloe brought joy to that house. You come into their home, disrespect your elders, and attack that nice young man, Preston. You are tearing your family apart out of pure spite." I sat there listening to these women who knew absolutely nothing about the reality of my family financial ruin. Evelyn stood behind them, soaking up their sympathy, nodding along as they berated me for crimes I did not commit. She felt safe behind her wall of church friends, believing she had successfully controlled the narrative and painted me as the ultimate villain. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or defend myself against their baseless accusations. Instead, I calmly reached into my blazer and pulled out my phone. I opened the security app connected to the hidden cameras I had installed in the townhouse living room months ago for my father protection. I scrolled back to the footage from 3 o'clock that afternoon, exactly 4 hours before the Thanksgiving dinner had even started. I tapped the share button. I selected AirDrop. 5 different iPhones pinged simultaneously in the quiet waiting room. "Check your phones," I said, leaning back in the plastic chair, crossing my legs. Aunt Vonda frowned, but pulled her phone from her purse. Sister Beatrice and Miss Clara did the same. Evelyn suddenly stopped her fake sobbing, her eyes widening as she realized what was happening. The high-quality video began to play on their screens and the audio filled the silent hospital waiting room with absolute crystal clarity. It was footage of my father, Marcus, sitting on the living room sofa looking exhausted. Preston and my mother were standing over him, backing him into a corner. My mother's voice, shrill and demanding, rang out from the phones. "You need to liquidate the retirement account," Marcus Evelyn hissed on the video. "Preston needs the cash to cover a shortfall for his company by Monday. You are being selfish. Your daughter's husband is building wealth for this family, and you are hoarding pennies." On the screen, my father clutched his chest, his face showing the exact same gray pallor he had when he collapsed at the dinner table. "I cannot," Evelyn Marcus pleaded in the video, his voice weak and trembling. "That is everything I have left. My heart cannot take this stress." Preston's voice chimed in next, arrogant and cold. "Stop being dramatic, Marcus. Sign the authorization forms, or Chloe and I will move to California, and you will never see your future grandchildren." The video ended. The hospital waiting room was dead silent. The church aunties stood frozen, staring at their phone screens in absolute horror. The self-righteous anger drained from their faces, entirely replaced by profound shock. Aunt Vonda slowly looked up from her screen and turned to stare at Evelyn. The supportive hands that had been holding my mother up quickly pulled away, leaving Evelyn standing completely alone in the center of the room. "You were harassing him for money while he begged for mercy," Sister Beatrice whispered, shaking her head in disgust. "You drove that man to a heart attack for your son-in-law." Evelyn stammered, taking a step back, looking around frantically for an excuse that did not exist. We were having a private family discussion. That video is taken out of context." No one believed her. The silence that followed was a heavier punishment than any words I could have spoken. The aunties quietly stepped away from her, moving to the other side of the waiting area, completely abandoning the woman they had arrived to protect. Before Evelyn could formulate another lie, the heavy double doors of the surgical wing swung open. A surgeon dressed in dark blue scrubs stepped into the waiting room, looking exhausted. "Family of Marcus." I stood up immediately, and Evelyn rushed forward, pushing past me to play the role of the devoted wife. "I am his wife," Evelyn declared loudly. "How is my husband?" The surgeon pulled off his surgical cap. He survived the initial cardiac event, but his heart sustained massive damage. "We managed to stabilize him, but he requires an emergency arterial bypass surgery immediately. If we do not operate tonight, he will not make it." "Thank God," Evelyn gasped, placing a hand over her heart. "Do the surgery. Do whatever it takes." "There is a complication." The surgeon continued, his expression turning grim. "When we ran his information through the hospital billing department, we discovered his premium health insurance policy was canceled 3 months ago. This is a high-risk emergency procedure. Without active insurance coverage, the hospital requires a $50,000 upfront deposit to secure the surgical team and the operating suite for an uninsured bypass." Evelyn's jaw dropped. $50,000. I do not have that kind of cash lying around. We are in the middle of a major real estate investment. She spun around and pointed her manicured finger directly at me, all traces of her previous humiliation vanishing behind her aggressive entitlement. "You," Evelyn commanded, her voice sharp and demanding. "You just bragged about buying that house in cash. You just bragged about being a senior partner at some fancy firm. You have the money. Pay for your father's surgery right now, Simone. Do not let him die because you want to be stubborn." I looked at my mother, seeing the absolute desperation mixed with her unyielding arrogance. She was demanding I save the man she had just pushed to the brink of death. "I will pay for it," I said calmly, pulling my black card from my wallet. "But I need his medical file from your bag to process the emergency intake forms. Hand it over." Evelyn hastily unzipped her oversized designer tote bag and pulled out my father's thick manila medical folder, shoving it into my hands without a second thought. She was too focused on getting the money to realize what she had just given me. I opened the folder to pull out his ID cards, but a folded piece of heavy stock paper caught my eye. I pulled it out, unfolding it under the harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room. It was a bank statement from his pension fund. I stared at the bold black numbers printed across the top of the page and felt the blood run completely cold in my veins. The final balance on my father's retirement account was exactly $0. I blinked hard, forcing my eyes to focus on the harsh fluorescent lighting reflecting off the glossy paper. Just 3 months ago, this account held $400,000, representing 40 years of my father breaking his back in municipal management. Now the transaction history showed a single catastrophic wire transfer authorized and executed under a forged signature. The destination account was printed in unmistakable block letters reading Preston Holdings LLC. Evelyn had not just harassed my father for money. She had actively stolen his entire life savings, forged his signature to bypass the spousal consent laws, and funneled every single penny into her white son-in-law fraudulent company. To cover her tracks, she had deliberately let my father premium health insurance lapse, knowing the premium payments would trigger an audit of the drained pension account. She traded her husband's life for a fake seat at an imaginary high society table. I marched back to the intake desk, where Evelyn was currently screaming at a terrified young nurse about the unfairness of hospital billing policies. I angrily slammed my credit card onto the counter. "Process the $50,000 deposit immediately," I told the clerk, keeping my eyes locked on my mother. "Get my father into the operating room right now." Evelyn let out a dramatic sigh, pressing her hand to her chest. "Thank God you finally decided to be useful, Simone. I will make sure Preston pays you back when his startup goes public next quarter." "He is never going public, Evelyn," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Because he stole Dad's pension, and you helped him do it." I held up the bank statement, letting her see the routing numbers. "You committed elder financial abuse and wire fraud. You let his insurance lapse to play rich. If he dies on that operating table, you are going to prison for manslaughter." Evelyn's face lost all its color, but her deep-seated delusion refused to crack. "You have no idea how business works," she hissed, stepping closer to me so the nurses would not hear. "Preston needed liquidity. It was a bridge loan. We are a family and we support our own. You are just a hateful, jealous girl trying to tear down a successful man." I turned my back on her, disgusted by her betrayal. I left her standing at the desk and walked down the long, sterile hospital corridor, needing clean air and a quiet space to call my corporate legal team. I had barely turned the corner toward the cafeteria when a heavy hand grabbed my shoulder and shoved me roughly against the cinder block wall. It was Preston. His face was twisted in a vicious snarl, completely stripped of the polite, wealthy gentleman facade he had worn for the past 3 years. The charming smile was gone, replaced by the arrogant entitlement of a man who believed the world belonged to him simply because he existed in white skin. "Listen to me very carefully, you little ghetto trash," Preston growled, leaning his tall frame over me, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me into submission. "You are going to walk back in there and tell your mother you made a mistake reading those documents. You are going to keep your mouth shut about my business, and you are going to pay whatever medical bills your father incurs." I looked at him with absolute indifference. "You just committed federal fraud, Preston. You stole a black man pension to fund a fake company. You are going to federal prison." Preston let out a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed down the empty hospital hallway. He shook his head, running a hand through his expensive haircut, looking at me like I was a piece of dirt on his designer shoe. "You think you can play with the big boys, Simone. You are completely out of your league. My family has been building wealth and power in this country for generations. We have dinner with senators. We play golf with federal judges. You think you can take me down with a printed bank statement." He stepped closer, his breath smelling of the expensive bourbon he had been drinking at my table earlier. Let me explain how the real world works to you. If you go to the police, I will deploy my family elite legal team. We will tie you up in litigation for the next decade. We will countersue you for defamation and bankrupt whatever pathetic little life you have managed to scrape together. I will tell the court that your father willingly invested in my company and that you are just a loud, bitter woman trying to ruin her sister's happiness because you are miserable and alone. He crossed his arms, radiating a sickening level of racial and class superiority. Go ahead, call the police, try it. Who do you think the judge will believe, me or an angry black receptionist? The silence was absolute. I did not scream, I did not cry. I did not give him the satisfaction of seeing me react to his pathetic, predictable microaggressions. Instead, I slowly reached up and smoothed the lapel of my tailored blazer. I reached into my interior pocket and pulled out a solid black metal business card. I held it between my index and middle finger and pressed it flat against his chest. Preston frowned, snatching the heavy card from my hand. He looked down at the engraved silver lettering. His eyes scanned the text, and I watched the arrogant smirk completely vanish from his face, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking like a ghost under the fluorescent hospital lights. I am not a receptionist, Preston, I said, my voice ringing with absolute terrifying authority. I am the senior partner at Vanguard Equity, and we just bought your company debt. The receptionist, a young woman who looked like she belonged on a runway rather than behind a desk, stood up in alarm. You cannot go back there, she stammered, reaching for her phone. Mr. Preston is in a very important meeting. I ignored her entirely and pushed straight through the heavy glass double doors, leading to the executive suites. I walked down the plush carpeted hallway until I reached the corner office with Preston's name etched in gold lettering on the frosted glass. I did not knock. I kicked the door open with the heel of my designer pump. Preston was not in an important meeting. He was practicing his golf putt into a crystal tumbler near the floor-to-ceiling windows. He spun around, dropping his putter as I marched into the room, my legal team spreading out to secure the perimeter of his massive corner office. What the hell are you doing, Simone? Preston yelled, his face flushing with immediate rage. You cannot just barge into my corporate headquarters. I will have you arrested for trespassing. Get out of my office before I call building security. This is not your office anymore, Preston, I said, pulling a thick stack of legal documents from my lead attorney briefcase and dropping them onto his polished mahogany desk. As of 8 o'clock this morning, Vanguard Equity exercised the acceleration clause on the massive mountain of debt you defaulted on. You missed 3 consecutive commercial loan payments. We bought the debt from your original lender for pennies on the dollar, and we are calling the entire note due immediately. You owe us $12 million payable right now. Preston scoffed, walking over to his desk with a swagger that betrayed his rapidly rising panic. You are bluffing. You do not have the authority to do this. My investors will cover the gap. I have millions in pledged capital coming in by Friday. I let out a cold, sharp laugh. You have absolutely no investors, Preston. My team spent the entire weekend auditing your financial records. There is no tech product. There is no software in development. You are running a textbook Ponzi scheme. You took the seed money from your wealthy white country club friends and used it to pay fake returns to the early backers, while siphoning the rest to fund your lavish lifestyle and pay for my sister's expensive habits. And when that money ran out, you committed federal wire fraud by forging my signature to steal the equity in my townhouse. Then you stole a black man pension to cover your immediate tracks. You are completely bankrupt and you are a criminal. Preston's face drained of color. He looked at the 4 lawyers standing silently around the room, realizing for the first time that his web of lies had completely unraveled. He lunged for his desk phone, but one of my lawyers casually reached over and disconnected the landline from the wall. We have already frozen your corporate accounts. I continued, stepping closer to his desk. The bank received the injunction 30 minutes ago. Every single asset in this room, every computer, every piece of furniture, every dollar in your operating budget now belongs to Vanguard Equity to offset the debt you owe us. You have absolutely nothing left. The reality of his destruction finally hit him, but instead of surrendering, Preston reverted to the toxic, arrogant entitlement he had wielded his entire life. The charming facade shattered completely. He slammed his fists onto the desk, his blue eyes burning with uncontrollable fury. He looked at me with sheer disgust, unable to fathom that a black woman he viewed as entirely beneath him had systematically dismantled his entire life. "You think you can do this to me?" Preston growled, his voice dropping to a vicious, dangerous register. "Do you know who I am? You are nothing but a diversity hire playing dress-up. I will destroy you, Simone. I will ruin your firm. I will make sure you are blacklisted in every corporate boardroom in the South." I did not stop at verbal threats. Driven by desperate, humiliated rage, Preston stormed around the side of the massive desk, raising his hand to physically grab me by the collar of my blazer. He tried to use his towering height to force me backward, intending to violently throw me out of the room. I did not even blink. Before Preston's fingers could graze my jacket, my two private security contractors moved with lightning speed. The lead guard grabbed Preston's outstretched arm, twisting it sharply behind his back, while the second guard swept Preston's legs out from under him. Preston let out a loud, pathetic yelp as he was violently tackled to the floor, his expensive custom suit wrinkling against the hardwood. The guard pinned him face down, planting a heavy knee directly between Preston's shoulder blades, holding him completely immobile. "Get off me!" Preston screamed, his cheek squished awkwardly against the floorboards. "You cannot do this. I am calling the police. You are assaulting me." "Call them," I said, looking down at him with absolute indifference. "They will be highly interested in your fraudulent accounting ledgers." While Preston continued to thrash and curse against the security guard, solid grip, I calmly walked around to the executive chair and sat down at his computer. The laptop was still unlocked and open to his email inbox. I minimized the browser and opened his main file directory, directing my lawyers to begin the formal data extraction process. As I clicked through the folders containing his fake financial projections and forged real estate deeds, my eyes caught a strangely named hidden folder buried deep within his personal drive. It was simply labeled Seattle. I clicked this folder open. It was filled with scanned legal documents, marriage certificates, child support payment logs, and heavily redacted banking statements. I opened the first marriage certificate and scanned the names listed. A slow, triumphant smile spread across my face as I stared at the screen, completely ignoring the desperate man shouting from the floor. I printed the entire file directly to the secure network server, ensuring every piece of evidence was locked away safely in Vanguard Legal Department. Leaving Preston pinned to the hardwood floor by my security team, I walked out of the luxury office suite without a single backward glance. The afternoon sun beat down on the Atlanta pavement as my private driver opened the door to my car. I handed him the address to my townhouse. It was time to clean house permanently. The drive to the red brick estate was blissfully quiet, giving me ample time to review the official 30-day eviction notice my legal team had drafted. I held the crisp manila envelope in my lap, feeling the weight of the justice it carried. When the car pulled into the familiar driveway, I stepped out, adjusting my blazer. The front door was unlocked as usual, reflecting the careless entitlement of the people living inside. I pushed the door open and stepped into the grand foyer. Evelyn and Chloe were in the living room, surrounded by shopping bags from high-end boutiques, completely oblivious to the fact that their financial lifeline had just been tackled to the ground by corporate security. They froze when they heard my heels clicking against the marble floor. Chloe dropped a designer handbag, and Evelyn's face twisted into a mask of pure fury. "What are you doing here?" Evelyn shrieked, marching toward me. "I told you never to set foot in this house again after what you did to your father. You are a disgrace to this family." "I am not here for a family reunion, Evelyn," I said, keeping my voice terrifyingly calm. I held up the manila envelope. "I am here to serve you and your golden child with a formal 30-day eviction notice. You have exactly 1 month to pack up these shopping bags and vacate my property." Chloe's eyes widened in sheer panic. She looked at the official legal document in my hand and immediately shifted into her default survival mode, theatrical victimhood. She ran to the bottom of the grand staircase, throwing herself against the banister. She dramatically grabbed her stomach and let out a piercing, exaggerated sob. "You cannot evict me, Simone," Chloe wailed, forcing heavy tears down her cheeks. "You cannot throw me out on the street. I am pregnant. I am carrying Preston child. Evelyn gasped, pressing both hands to her chest. A grandchild. The ultimate prize for a woman obsessed with securing her wealthy white son-in-law permanent presence in their lives. Evelyn spun around to face me, her eyes blazing with irrational hatred. She raised her hand and swung with all her might, slapping me hard across the left cheek. The sharp crack echoed through the cavernous foyer. "You are a monster!" Evelyn screamed, stepping protectively in front of Chloe. "Your sister is carrying a child. She is carrying the legacy of this family, and you want to throw a pregnant woman out into the cold. You have no soul, Simone. You have always been a bitter, jealous wretch." My cheek burned from the impact, but I did not flinch. I did not raise my hand to touch my face. I just stared at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical indifference. A pregnant woman. I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You mean exactly like she was pregnant 5 years ago on the day of my college graduation? Evelyn faltered, stepping back as I advanced on them. Chloe, sobbing, suddenly hitched. Yes, I continued, stepping right into Evelyn's personal space. Let us talk about Chloe pregnancies. Let us talk about how 5 years ago I was walking across the stage as the valedictorian of my graduating class, and Chloe suddenly collapsed in the bleachers, clutching her stomach and screaming that she was having a miscarriage. You forced my father to leave the ceremony. You ruined the entire day, making it all about her tragedy. And a week later, when I found the receipt for the abortion clinic she visited 2 months prior, you told me to keep my mouth shut because Chloe needed grace. She used a fake medical emergency to steal the one day that was supposed to be mine. That was different. Evelyn stammered, her confidence cracking. She was young. She was in a dark place. This is Preston, baby. This is a real blessing. Chloe nodded vigorously, still clinging to the staircase railing. It is true, Simone. I just came from the doctor this morning. I have the ultrasound right there on the console table. We were going to frame it. I turned my head. Sitting on the marble entryway table next to a pile of unpaid bills and fashion magazines was a glossy black and white ultrasound printout. It was prominently displayed, placed perfectly, so anyone walking through the front door would immediately see it and offer their congratulations. I walked over to the table, the sharp clicks of my heels acting as a countdown timer to their destruction. I picked up the glossy paper. It showed a perfectly clear image of a developing fetus. It is a beautiful picture, Chloe, I said, running my thumb over the glossy surface. Preston must be so proud to pass on his fake aristocratic genes. He is, Chloe sniffled, wiping her eyes. He cried when he saw it. So you see, you cannot throw us out. I need a stable home for my baby. I let out a harsh laugh, holding the ultrasound up to the light. You really should pay more attention to the details when you steal things from your friends, Chloe. What are you talking about? Evelyn demanded, snatching at the air. I held the printout just out of her reach and pointed a manicured finger to the top right corner of the medical image. Right there, printed in unmistakable digital white text, was the patient information. It did not say Chloe. I looked dead into my sister's terrified eyes. This has your best friend name on it, Chloe. It says Jasmine Washington. You stole your best friend ultrasound picture to trap a man who is currently sitting in police custody. Chloe's face drained of all color, matching the pristine white walls of the foyer. Evelyn stared at the name printed on the scan, her mouth opening and closing as the reality of her golden child deception finally began to sink in. But before either of them could formulate another pathetic lie, my cell phone began to ring loudly in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the caller ID. It was a Seattle area code. The final nail in the coffin was calling. The shrill ring of my cell phone echoed off the marble walls of the foyer, cutting through the heavy silence. I glanced down at the screen. A Seattle area code flashed brightly. Chloe slapped her hands over her ears, refusing to look at the ultrasound picture I was holding. "You are lying!" she screamed, her voice cracking with desperate panic. "You printed that out yourself just to ruin my marriage. Preston loves me, and we are building a family together. You cannot stand that he chose me instead of some bitter corporate workaholic." I did not argue with her delusion. I simply swiped the green button on my phone and tapped the speaker icon, holding the device out so the audio would project clearly across the grand entryway. "Hello," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Is this the number associated with Preston Holdings?" A woman's voice snapped through the speaker, tight with fury and a sharp Pacific Northwest accent. Who the hell is this? And why does my husband have a secondary autopay account linked to an address in Atlanta? Chloe froze. Her hands slowly lowered from her ears. Evelyn stopped breathing, her eyes darting from my phone to her golden child. I smiled, offering a polite, professional tone. I am the senior partner at Vanguard Equity, currently auditing Preston Financial Assets. To whom am I speaking? I am his wife, the woman barked, the impatience in her voice undeniable. My name is Meredith. We have been married for 7 years. I just got a fraud alert from our primary joint account in Seattle because someone named Chloe has been draining our savings to buy designer bags at Neiman Marcus and charging thousands of dollars to a luxury fertility clinic. I want to know exactly who Chloe is and why my husband is paying for her lifestyle. The designer handbag Chloe had dropped earlier suddenly looked like a piece of cheap trash sitting on the floor. Chloe's legs completely gave out beneath her. She dropped to her knees on the hard marble floor, the sound of her kneecaps hitting the stone echoing sharply in the large space. She stared at the phone, her mouth open in a silent scream. Evelyn rushed forward, waving her hands frantically. "This is a prank," she yelled at the phone. "Preston is married to my daughter. They had a beautiful destination wedding in Savannah last spring. You are a liar trying to extort a wealthy man." Meredith let out a harsh, humorless laugh on the other end of the line. "Wealthy? Are you out of your mind? Preston has not had a dime to his name since his trust fund was liquidated 3 years ago. We are drowning in debt because of his failed tech ventures. He told me he was moving down south for a 6-month consulting contract to save our house from foreclosure. If he married your daughter, he committed bigamy." I looked down at Chloe, who was now trembling uncontrollably. She had faked a pregnancy with a stolen ultrasound to trap a man who was already legally married to a white woman in Washington state. The layers of deception were so thick they were suffocating each other. "He married you for this house, Chloe," I said, looking at my sister's shattered expression. He looked up the property records, saw a multi-million-dollar townhouse in a prime Atlanta neighborhood, and assumed your family owned it free and clear. He targeted you because you project the image of a wealthy socialite online. He needed a naive, desperate woman with access to prime real estate so he could forge the deed and secure a massive loan to pay off his Seattle debts. He used you, Chloe. You were nothing but a temporary bank account to him. Meredith was shouting through the speaker, demanding the address of the townhouse, threatening to call the federal authorities. I calmly pressed the end call button, cutting off the furious Seattle wife. The sudden quiet in the foyer was deafening. Chloe buried her face in her hands, rocking back and forth on the floor. Her entire identity, her fake wealth, her fake pregnancy, her fake marriage had just been incinerated in less than 5 minutes. She had nothing left but the unpaid bills sitting on the console table. Evelyn, however, refused to break. Her obsession with proximity to white wealth and status was a sickness that ran deeper than logic or reality. She marched over to me, her face contorted with a terrifying level of denial. "You hired an actress," Evelyn hissed, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You hired some woman to call your phone and pretend to be his wife. Preston is a good man from a respectable family. He would never do something like this. He loves Chloe. He is going to be a father." "I just showed you the ultrasound belongs to Jasmine," I replied, keeping my posture rigid. "And you just heard his legal wife confirm he is a fraud. Evelyn, you are defending a criminal who tried to leave you homeless." Evelyn covered her ears, mirroring Chloe's earlier reaction. "Shut up," she screamed, her voice echoing up the grand staircase. "You are just trying to steal our joy. You set him up. You bought his company debt just to frame him so you could look like the savior. I will not let you ruin my family. I am going to hire the best defense attorney in the state of Georgia. I will get Preston out of whatever legal trap you put him in, and he will sue you for everything you have. You do not have a single dollar to your name." "Evelyn," I reminded her, crossing my arms. "I froze your accounts when I seized his assets. You cannot even afford a public defender right now." Evelyn's eyes went wide with frantic, manic energy. She looked around the lavish foyer, her gaze darting to the expensive chandelier, the imported rugs, and finally up the stairs toward her master bedroom. A sickening smile spread across her face. "You think you have stripped me of my power, Simone," she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "You forget who I am. I come from a line of women who know how to survive. I have assets you know nothing about. She spun around, ignoring her weeping golden child on the floor, and sprinted toward the grand staircase. She grabbed the banister, hauling herself up the steps with a desperate, frantic speed. I watched her go, knowing exactly where she was heading. At the back of her master closet, hidden behind rows of designer coats she could not afford, was a heavy steel wall safe. "I am going to the safe!" Evelyn yelled down from the second-floor landing, her voice carrying a mix of triumph and absolute delusion. "I am getting the heirloom diamonds my mother left me. They are flawless and they are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I am going to pawn them today. I am hiring a shark of a lawyer to destroy you, Simone. You hear me. I will pawn the family diamonds to save my son-in-law." I stood perfectly still in the foyer, listening to her frantic footsteps pounding down the hallway above. I did not chase her. I did not try to stop her from opening that safe. I just looked down at Chloe, who was still weeping into the marble floor, and let a cold, knowing smile touch my lips. Evelyn came barreling down the grand staircase, clutching a heavy mahogany velvet box against her chest. Her breath was ragged, her eyes wide with a manic desperation that completely stripped away her usual polished elegance. She ignored Chloe, who was still curled in a pathetic ball on the marble floor, weeping over the smoking remains of her fraudulent marriage. Evelyn marched straight past her golden child, pulling a cell phone from her designer pocket and dialing a number with shaking fingers. She demanded an emergency house call from a private estate appraiser she had used for years, promising him a hefty premium if he arrived within the hour. I remained standing by the front door, watching my mother construct her final fragile lifeboat out of pure delusion. I did not try to reason with her. I knew exactly what was inside that mahogany box, and I knew exactly what the appraiser was going to say. I just leaned against the entryway console table and waited for reality to deliver the final crushing blow. Less than 40 minutes later, a black town car pulled into the driveway. A sharply dressed man with a leather briefcase stepped out and hurried up to the front door. He looked incredibly uncomfortable stepping into the foyer, glancing nervously at the broken glass, the ruined shopping bags, and Chloe sobbing on the floor. Evelyn did not even offer him a polite greeting. She practically shoved the velvet box into his hands the second he crossed the threshold. "Tell me what these are worth right now," Evelyn commanded, her voice shrill and urgent. "These are the Montgomery Estate diamonds. They have been in my family for 4 generations. I need to liquidate them today to hire a federal defense attorney for my son-in-law. I know they were appraised at $400,000 10 years ago. I will take $300,000 in a cash wire right now." The appraiser adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and opened the box. Resting on a bed of white satin was a massive, intricate diamond necklace that caught the afternoon light. It looked incredibly heavy, blindingly bright, and completely flawless. The appraiser pulled a jeweler loop from his pocket and leaned over the box. He held the necklace up to the natural light streaming through the front windows. Evelyn crossed her arms, tapping her foot impatiently. She shot a triumphant glare in my direction. "You thought you could trap us," she sneered. "You thought freezing our accounts would leave us defenseless against your little corporate takeover. You underestimated my resources, Simone. Preston is going to walk free, and I am going to make sure you pay for this disrespect." The appraiser lowered his loop. He placed the heavy necklace back into the velvet box and closed the lid with a soft, definitive click. He took a step back from my mother, looking at her with a mixture of profound pity and deep professional annoyance. Evelyn held out her hand, expecting a checkbook. "Well," she snapped, "how fast can you wire the funds?" "I cannot wire you anything," the appraiser said, keeping his voice low and steady. "Ma'am, I do not know who sold you this piece or what happened to the original stones, but I cannot give you a single dollar for this necklace." Evelyn's face contorted. "What are you talking about? I just told you they are the Montgomery diamonds." "They are not diamonds," the appraiser replied, shaking his head. "They are cubic zirconia. Every single stone in this setting is a synthetic fake. It is a very good imitation designed to fool the naked eye, but under magnification, it is completely worthless. The silver setting might fetch you $200 at a local pawn shop, but the stones themselves are just cheap cut glass." The foyer went dead silent. The only sound was Chloe's sudden sharp intake of breath from the floor. Evelyn stumbled backward, hitting the bottom step of the staircase. "You are lying!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the appraiser. "You are trying to scam me. You want to steal my family legacy." I stepped forward, my heels echoing sharply against the marble. "He is not scamming you, Evelyn," I said, my voice slicing through her hysterical denial. "He is telling you the exact truth. The real diamonds have been gone for 2 years." Evelyn whipped her head toward me, her eyes bulging. "What did you do? Did you steal them, Simone? Did you replace my diamonds?" "I did not touch your precious jewelry, Evelyn," I replied coldly. I pointed down at the woman still trembling on the floor. "Ask your golden child. Ask Chloe where your heirloom diamonds went." Evelyn slowly turned to look at her favorite daughter. Chloe had stopped crying. Her face was buried in her hands, her entire body shaking with fresh terror. She refused to look up. "Tell her, Chloe," I demanded, taking another step forward. "Tell your mother how you racked up an $80,000 debt at an underground poker ring in Vegas 2 years ago. Tell her how the loan sharks threatened to break your legs if you did not pay them back by Monday morning. You knew Evelyn would never check the safe because she only wore that necklace for the annual country club gala. So you hired a shady jeweler downtown to pry the real diamonds out of the setting and replace them with cubic zirconia. You sold your mother generational wealth to pay off a gambling debt, and you let her parade around town wearing cheap glass." Chloe let out a pathetic whimpering sound, curling into a tighter ball. "I am sorry," she choked out, her voice muffled by her hands. "I was desperate, Mom. I was going to buy them back. I swear I was going to buy them back once my influencer deals took off." The realization hit Evelyn like a physical blow. The absolute foundation of her vanity, her prized possession, her emergency fund, the very symbol of the wealth she worshipped, had been stolen and pawned by the only person she actually loved. The golden child facade shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Evelyn let out a primal, agonizing scream. It was not a scream of sadness. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated rage. She lunged forward, diving directly at Chloe. Evelyn grabbed a fistful of Chloe's expensive hair extensions and yanked violently. "You stupid, selfish little girl," Evelyn shrieked, slapping Chloe hard across the back of the head. "You stole from me. You ruined my life. I gave you everything. I put you above everyone else, and you stole my diamonds." Chloe screamed in pain, trying to swat her mother's hands away. "Mom, stop. Please stop." Evelyn did not stop. She dragged Chloe by the hair across the marble floor, screaming curses and throwing wild slaps at her daughter's face. The appraiser looked horrified, grabbing his briefcase and sprinting out the front door without another word. I did not intervene. I stood perfectly still, watching the 2 women who had tormented me my entire life finally turn their vicious toxicity onto each other. They were tearing each other apart right in the middle of my foyer, their fake world of wealth and privilege collapsing into a violent, ugly brawl. I reached into my blazer and pulled out a roll of heavy-duty tape I had brought specifically for this occasion. I calmly walked over to the heavy oak front door, stepping neatly over the shattered glass from a broken vase that had been knocked over during their scuffle. I smoothed the eviction notice flat against the dark wood and taped all 4 corners, pressing them down firmly so the document was impossible to miss. I turned back to look at them one last time. Evelyn was still screaming, pulling Chloe's hair, while Chloe sobbed and begged for mercy. Neither of them even noticed me opening the front door. "You have 29 days left," I said, my voice cold and final over the sound of their chaotic fighting. I stepped out into the bright Atlanta sunlight, letting the heavy front door click shut behind me, leaving them locked inside the empty shell of a life they had destroyed themselves. The echo of the heavy oak door clicking shut behind me was not the end of their desperate delusions. It only forced them to seek a new host to parasitize. Inside that crumbling townhouse, Evelyn and Chloe realized they had absolutely zero access to my funds, zero access to the pawn shop, and zero time left before utter ruin. Their survival instincts kicked in, driving them to commit the ultimate act of social suicide. That very evening, the prestigious Buckhead Country Club was hosting its annual High Society Charity Gala. It was the most exclusive white tie event in Atlanta, and it was being hosted directly by Preston wealthy parents. Evelyn convinced herself that if they just showed up, dressed in their finest remaining gowns, they could corner Preston Mother and beg for a financial bailout. She actually believed the illusion of their shared family ties would override the reality of her son-in-law massive federal fraud. Delusional and completely desperate, Evelyn forced a still weeping Chloe into a heavily sequined emerald gown that had not been paid for. They layered on whatever cheap costume jewelry they had left, masking their impending homelessness behind layers of thick makeup and hairspray. They took a rideshare to the country club because their luxury leased vehicles had already been flagged for repossession. When they arrived at the grand marble steps of the venue, they marched past the valet stand and tried to breeze right through the golden doors, acting like they owned the city. They barely made it past the crystal chandeliers in the main lobby before reality slammed into them. Preston Mother Margaret stood near the velvet ropes of the VIP entrance, greeting the elite politicians and old money heirs of Atlanta. Margaret was a notoriously ruthless woman who wielded her generational white privilege like a weapon. The moment she spotted Evelyn and Chloe trying to bypass the guest list, her fake high society smile instantly vanished. She did not politely pull them aside. She did not care about causing a scene. She marched right up to them in the center of the crowded lobby, her diamond earrings glittering under the bright lights. "What are you doing here?" Margaret demanded, her voice slicing through the elegant classical music playing in the background. Her tone was sharp enough to cut glass. Evelyn immediately put on her most subservient fawning smile. "Margaret, we need your help," Evelyn pleaded, reaching out to touch the woman's arm. "There has been a terrible misunderstanding with Preston Business. We need an emergency loan to secure his defense attorney and keep the house. We are family, Margaret. We have to stick together." Margaret snatched her arm back as if Evelyn's touch was a disease. She looked at Evelyn and Chloe with absolute unmasked disgust. "Family," Margaret sneered loudly, ensuring the wealthy guests stopping to watch could hear every single word. "You are not my family. You are a pair of ghetto gold diggers who latched onto my son and dragged him down into your pathetic financial mess. My son is currently sitting in a holding cell because of the trash he married." Chloe gasped, stepping back as the racial microaggressions and blatant classism hit her square in the chest. "You cannot talk to us like that," Chloe cried out. "I am his wife. You are a parasite," Margaret barked, stepping aggressively into Chloe's personal space. "You drained his accounts to buy designer garbage, and now you have the absolute audacity to show up at my charity gala begging for handouts like common street beggars." Security. Two massive security guards in dark suits immediately stepped forward, grabbing Evelyn and Chloe by the arms. The humiliation was absolute. The elite white society Evelyn had worshipped her entire life was now publicly treating her like a trespasser, throwing her out like trash. But instead of finding her dignity, Evelyn completely broke. The desperate need to maintain her proximity to wealth overrode every last ounce of her self-respect. She violently pulled her arm away from the security guard and turned on her own daughter. "Apologize to her," Evelyn screamed, hitting Chloe on the shoulder. "Apologize to Margaret right now, Chloe. Tell her you are sorry for dragging Preston into debt. Get on your knees and beg her to help us." "Mom, no," Chloe sobbed, tears ruining her expensive makeup as the entire lobby of wealthy elites watched them in horrified fascination. "Do it!" Evelyn hissed, grabbing Chloe by the wrist and physically forcing her downward. "Do it, or we are going to be living on the street." Chloe fell to her knees on the cold marble floor, crying hysterically, looking up at the racist woman who had just publicly degraded them both. "Please, Margaret," Chloe begged, her voice echoing tragically in the grand lobby. "Please just help us. I will do whatever you want. Just give us the money for the lawyers." Margaret looked down at Chloe kneeling at her feet and let out a cold, dismissive laugh. She signaled the guards again. "Throw these pathetic women out the back service door. I do not want them ruining the aesthetic of the main entrance." The guards moved in, dragging a sobbing Chloe off the floor and grabbing Evelyn by the elbows. But before they could haul them toward the service hallway, a massive commotion erupted outside the front glass doors of the country club. The valets were sprinting down the steps. The paparazzi stationed outside the event began flashing their cameras in a blinding frenzy. The heavy golden doors of the main lobby swung open, held wide by the club manager himself. A sleek midnight black Maybach glided to a perfect stop right at the edge of the red carpet. Margaret frowned, stepping away from Evelyn and Chloe to see who was commanding such an extreme level of attention. The wealthy guests in the lobby stopped whispering about my mother and turned their heads toward the entrance. The rear door of the Maybach opened. I stepped out onto the red carpet. I was not wearing my usual modest corporate blazer. I was draped in a breathtaking custom haute couture gown made of deep crimson silk that cascaded perfectly to the floor. Diamonds rested against my collarbone, catching the flash of the cameras. I looked like absolute royalty, radiating a level of power and wealth that made the entire country club lobby hold its breath. The man who stepped out of the Maybach from the other side and walked around to offer me his arm was not a security guard. It was the mayor of Atlanta. He smiled warmly, resting my hand on his forearm as we walked up the marble steps together. The heavy golden doors were held open for us. As I stepped into the grand lobby, the massive crowd of Atlanta elite society instantly parted for me, creating a wide, clear path straight through the room. They looked at me with deep awe and immediate respect. I walked down the center of the lobby, my heels clicking rhythmically against the stone. I stopped right in front of Margaret, who was currently staring at me with her mouth hanging wide open in pure shock. I glanced down at Evelyn and Chloe, who were still being held by the security guards, looking up at me like they had just seen a ghost. I smiled at the racist woman who had just called my mother a beggar. "Good evening, Margaret," I said, my voice smooth and commanding. "I hope you saved me a seat at the head table. I hear the primary debt holder of this country club gets to make the opening speech." Margaret's face drained of color, instantly transforming from a mask of aristocratic superiority to a portrait of absolute terror. She stared at me, her jaw trembling uncontrollably, unable to process the words I had just spoken. The mayor of Atlanta, standing proudly by my side, did not hesitate to twist the knife. He turned to slowly face the hushed crowd of wealthy socialites who had gathered in the grand lobby. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor announced, his voice carrying effortlessly across the marble room, "it is my absolute honor to introduce the anonymous benefactor who single-handedly saved this historic establishment from bankruptcy earlier today. Please welcome the new primary debt holder of the Buckhead Country Club and our largest philanthropic donor of the evening, Simone." A collective gasp rippled through the lobby. The elite white society that Margaret had weaponized her entire life was now staring at me with deep reverence. I watched Margaret's eyes dart around, frantically searching for an escape that did not exist. The country club she used to enforce her status to humiliate my mother and sister was no longer hers. I owned the ground she was standing on. Down on the floor, Evelyn and Chloe remained frozen in shock. The security guards released their grip, unsure of what to do now that the most powerful person in the room had acknowledged them. Evelyn stared up at my crimson silk gown, her eyes wide with a horrifying realization. The daughter she had relentlessly mocked was standing at the pinnacle of the society she had destroyed her own family trying to reach. I did not offer Evelyn a single hand up. I did not even look at her again as she sat trembling on the cold floor. I simply took the mayor's arm and let him escort me into the main ballroom. The grand ballroom was a sea of crystal chandeliers and tables draped in heavy white silk. Hundreds of Atlanta's wealthiest residents took their seats, their eyes glued to me as I glided toward the main stage. The string quartet faded into absolute silence as the wealthy guests eagerly held their breath to climb the short velvet stairs, my crimson train flowing elegantly behind me, and stepped up to the crystal podium. I adjusted the heavy microphone. I spoke with a truly terrifying, freezing calm that commanded absolute authority over the entire room. "Good evening, everyone." I began, my voice ringing clear and steady through the massive sound system. "We are gathered here tonight to celebrate legacy, wealth, and family. But before we open our checkbooks, I believe in absolute transparency, especially regarding the family hosting this event." I looked directly at the head table where Preston's father sat, paralyzed with confusion. Margaret had stumbled into the ballroom behind me, clutching her pearl necklace, looking like she was about to faint from public humiliation. "Many of you have invested your hard-earned capital into a tech startup managed by Preston." I continued, pacing slowly across the stage. "I am here to inform you that your money is completely gone. Preston does not own a tech company. He operates a fraudulent Ponzi scheme, using your investments to pay off his staggering personal debts. The ballroom erupted into panicked whispers. Wealthy investors began pulling out their phones, frantically checking their accounts. But financial fraud is only the beginning, I said, raising my hand to quiet the room. When Preston ran out of your money, he decided to target my family. He forged my signature on federal real estate documents to illegally leverage my property. And when that was not enough, he committed elder financial abuse by stealing the entire life savings of a hardworking black man, father, leaving him uninsured and fighting for his life on an operating table. A collective murmur of profound disgust washed over the crowd. People turned to stare at Preston's parents, who were now shrinking. The floor would swallow them whole. And for those of you wondering how he managed to infiltrate my family, I added, keeping my gaze locked on the back of the room where Chloe and Evelyn had managed to sneak in. Standing near the service doors, Preston committed bigamy. He left his legal wife in Seattle drowning in unpaid bills and flew down south to marry my desperate, naive sister, simply because he thought she owned prime real estate. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors of the ballroom burst open with a violent crash. Preston rushed into the room, his tuxedo disheveled, his face slick with sweat. He looked at the stage, seeing me holding the microphone, and his eyes widened in sheer, unfiltered panic. "She is lying!" Preston screamed across the ballroom, his voice cracking with desperation. "Do not listen to her. She is a crazy, bitter woman, trying to ruin my family." Nobody moved to help him. The wealthy investors he had courted for months looked at him with absolute revulsion. His own parents refused to make eye contact with him. He was completely exposed, standing alone in the center of the room, stripped of his charm, his lies, and his unearned power. The elite society he had used to terrorize my parents had turned its back on him forever. I looked down at him from the stage, smiling a cold, lethal smile. The faint wail of sirens began to bleed through the thick walls of the country club. The sound grew louder, multiplying until the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the high arched windows of the ballroom, casting frantic shadows across the crystal chandeliers. Preston whipped his head toward the windows, terror finally breaking his arrogant facade. He realized the game was entirely over. He had nowhere left to run, and no one left to manipulate. I did not just come for the champagne. I announced, my voice echoing one last time over the rising sound of the sirens. I came to open the front door for the FBI. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom burst open, and a dozen federal agents wearing tactical jackets flooded the country club. Preston did not have time to take a single step. Two agents grabbed him by the shoulders of his tailored tuxedo and slammed him face first onto a table covered in caviar and crystal champagne flutes. The sharp click of metal handcuffs echoed through the silent room. Margaret shrieked, pressing a hand to her chest as her precious son was hauled upright, his expensive suit stained with food and his face twisted in panic. The investors he had spent months courting simply turned their backs in pure disgust. I stood on the stage, smoothing the fabric of my crimson silk gown, watching the destruction of his privileged facade. He believed his skin color and family name made him untouchable, but federal wire fraud does not care about country club memberships. Within the hour, the glittering atmosphere of the gala was replaced by the harsh fluorescent lighting of the downtown federal precinct. I was escorted into a quiet, sterile interview room, not as a suspect, but as the primary victim and key corporate informant. My legal team waited just outside the door, while lead Detective Davis, a sharp-eyed man who had been tracking Preston shell companies for months, sat across from me. I handed over the files my firm had extracted from Preston's laptop containing every forged signature and fake bank statement. Detective Davis treated me with respect, offering me a cup of coffee while he reviewed the undeniable mountain of evidence. Through the thin walls of the precinct, I could hear the muffled sounds of chaos unfolding in the adjacent interrogation rooms. Preston was not holding up well under federal pressure. The charming Southern gentleman routine had completely evaporated, leaving behind a desperate coward, willing to do anything to save his own skin. Detective Davis stepped out for a moment, leaving the door slightly ajar. I could hear Preston's voice echoing down the hallway, loudly whining to his high-priced defense attorney. "I did not forge those LLC documents," Preston shouted, his voice cracking with panic. It was Chloe. She had access to Simone Mail. She knew the layout of the townhouse and had the original lease agreements. I thought her family was rich and offering to help fund my business. She manipulated me. She is a desperate social climber who lied about her wealth to trap me into marriage. She masterminded the real estate fraud. I sat in my chair and took a slow sip of my coffee, shaking my head at his pathetic attempt to rewrite reality. He was trying to throw his pregnant wife under the bus, hoping the feds would target the black woman instead of the wealthy white man. What Preston did not realize was that the federal agents had intentionally placed Chloe in the interrogation room directly across from his. The walls in the precinct were notoriously thin, and the agents had conveniently left the air vents open. Chloe heard every single word her fraudulent husband just yelled. The wail of absolute heartbreak and furious rage that erupted from Chloe's room was loud enough to rattle the glass of the precinct windows. She had faked a pregnancy, stolen her best friend, ultrasound, pawned her mother heirloom jewelry, and endured public humiliation to secure this man. And the second he faced a consequence, he tossed her directly to the wolves. The golden child illusion shattered into a million jagged pieces of vindictive survival instinct. Chloe began screaming at the federal agents in her room, her voice reaching a hysterical pitch. "He is a liar," she shrieked, banging her fists on the metal table. "He forged the signatures himself. He used my sister house to get a $2 million loan because his tech startup was bankrupt. I have proof. I know exactly where he hid the money. He wired it to a hidden offshore account in the Cayman Islands to avoid the corporate auditors. I know the account name and password because I saw him write it down. If you give me full immunity right now, I will give you everything you need to lock him away for 20 years. Chloe spilled every dark secret Preston had ever shared eagerly, handing the agents the coordinates of his stolen wealth. She traded her loyalty for her freedom without a second thought, destroying whatever leverage Preston thought he had. I smiled, setting my coffee cup down. The house of cards had burned to ash. My corporate takedown was executed, and my sister had handed the government the final nail for Preston's coffin. All I had to do now was sign my statement and walk out to resume my life. Detective Davis walked back into my interrogation room, holding a fresh stack of printed financial reports. He did not look triumphant. He did not look like a man who had just secured a slam-dunk federal conviction. His brow was heavily furrowed, and he looked at me with an expression of deep confusion. He closed the door behind him and sat down slowly, resting the papers on the metal table. "We just had our cyber division run the credentials your sister provided," Detective Davis said, his voice tight with bewilderment. "The offshore account in the Cayman Islands exists exactly where she said it would, but there is a massive problem." I narrowed my eyes, sitting up straighter in my chair. "What is the problem, Detective? Is the money tied up in foreign investments?" Detective Davis shook his head, tapping his finger against the top page of the report. "The money is not tied up. The money is completely gone. Every single dollar of the $2 million he stole from your property equity was drained out of the offshore account exactly 48 hours ago. And based on the IP addresses we just pulled, Preston did not execute the transfer. Someone else logged in and took everything." I leaned across the metal table and pulled the printed report from Detective Davis' hand. My eyes scanned the IP addresses and the transaction timestamps. The transfer was executed using a residential network right here in Atlanta. Preston did not take the money because he was too busy trying to cover his tracks at the corporate office. I pulled my personal laptop from my leather bag and logged directly into my firm's secure financial tracking software. "Give me the destination routing number," I told the detective, my fingers flying rapidly across the keyboard. He read off the 12-digit sequence, and I plugged it into Vanguard Global Database. The system ran the trace, cutting through the layers of cheap digital obfuscation whoever did this had attempted to use. The money bounced from the Cayman Islands to a domestic shell corporation and then dropped straight into a private wealth management account at a regional bank in Georgia. I clicked on the account ownership details and let out a cold, sharp laugh. It was not a professional hacker. It was not a corporate spy. The name on the private wealth account belonged to my mother, Evelyn. She had found Preston's notebook containing the passwords while snooping through his things at the townhouse. Realizing the fraudulent empire was collapsing and that my father required expensive medical care, Evelyn made her choice. She decided to abandon her dying husband in the hospital, drain the stolen offshore account, and hide the cash to maintain her lavish lifestyle. She stole the money that Preston originally stole from my father's pension, I explained, turning the laptop screen so the federal agent could see the undeniable proof. My mother watched my father collapse from a massive heart attack, and instead of staying by his side, she ran home to secure a $2 million bag for herself. She planned to leave him with the mounting medical debt while she shopped her way through the grief. Detective Davis stared at the screen, his jaw tightening with absolute disgust. He stood up immediately, pulling his radio from his heavy utility belt. "We have her dead to rights," he said, walking toward the door. "I am calling the federal prosecutor right now. We are putting an immediate government freeze on every single account associated with her social security number." "Do it," I replied, packing up my laptop. "Take everything she has." Within 10 minutes, the sweeping federal freeze was fully executed. The United States government locked down her checking accounts, her savings, her credit cards, and the private wealth portfolio holding the stolen $2 million. Evelyn was financially paralyzed, but she did not know it yet. I thanked Detective Davis and walked out of the precinct, the warm Atlanta night air hitting my face. I pulled out my phone and checked the family location sharing app that Evelyn had forced us all to download years ago to keep tabs on my sister. Evelyn icon was glowing brightly, moving around the upscale Phipps Plaza luxury mall. While my father was fighting for his life in the intensive care unit, and her golden child was screaming in a federal interrogation room, Evelyn had decided to go shopping. She desperately needed the comfort of designer labels to soothe her nerves and prove to herself that she was still a woman of elite status. I directed my driver to take me straight to the luxury mall. I wanted to see the exact. The delusion shattered. When I arrived, I walked the polished marble floors of the shopping center, heading directly toward the most exclusive designer boutique in the building. I stood outside the massive glass storefront, blending into the evening crowd of wealthy shoppers. Inside, Evelyn was putting on a spectacular performance. She was sipping complimentary champagne, pointing imperiously at a display of imported leather handbags. She selected a rare exotic skin tote with a $10,000 price tag, waving her hand dismissively at the sales associate as if the cost was merely pocket change. She slapped her premium credit card onto the glass counter, lifting her chin with that familiar toxic arrogance. She thought she had outsmarted everyone. She thought she had secured her wealthy future, leaving the rest of us to burn in the wreckage. The sales associate swiped the card. The machine beeped a harsh, rejecting tone. The associate frowned, trying the card a second time. "I am sorry, madam," the associate said politely, sliding the card back across the glass. "It says the transaction is declined." Evelyn's face turned bright red with instant indignation. "Declined," she snapped, her voice echoing through the quiet luxury store. "That is a premium account with absolutely no limit. Your machine is clearly broken. Try it again right now." She reached into her purse and pulled out a second card, then a third, tossing them onto the counter. "Run all of them," she demanded loudly. "I am a highly respected client." The associate swiped every single card. Each one triggered the exact same harsh warning beep. Evelyn, panic began to rise, bleeding through her wealthy facade. She grabbed her phone, trying to log into her banking app, but the screen displayed a stark red federal lock notification. The money was gone. Her access was completely revoked. She began to shout at the sales associate, causing a massive scene, accusing the store of embarrassing her on purpose. The boutique manager quickly signaled mall security. Two uniformed guards arrived, stepping into the store, firmly grabbing Evelyn by the arms. "You cannot touch me," Evelyn screamed, thrashing wildly, as they dragged her away from the $10,000 handbag. "I am a wealthy woman. Do you know who I am?" I stepped out from the crowd and stood directly in her path, looking her up and down as the guards hauled her toward the exit. "You are nobody, Evelyn," I said, watching the sheer terror fill her eyes as she realized her pockets were completely empty. The next 30 days evaporated with brutal efficiency. without access to her stolen wealth or her premium credit cards. Evelyn found herself trapped in a reality she had spent her entire life running from. The townhouse she once used as a monument to her fake upper-class status became a quiet, dark prison. I had legally shut off the utilities the moment the property reverted to my full control, leaving her and Chloe to sit in the sweltering Atlanta heat with no air conditioning and no running water. They had refused to pack, holding on to the delusional belief that Preston wealthy white parents would swoop in and save them at the 11th hour. But Preston parents had fled back to Seattle, changing their phone numbers to dodge the federal investigators swarming their son. At precisely 8 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, the heavy tires of a Fulton County Sheriff cruiser crunched against the gravel of the driveway. Two uniformed deputies stepped out of the vehicle carrying the official court-ordered writ of possession. I parked my black SUV across the street, rolling the tinted window down just enough to hear the glorious sound of absolute accountability. The deputies pounded heavily on the custom oak front door. "Open up, Sheriff Department. You have 10 minutes to vacate the premises." The door swung open, revealing Evelyn and Chloe looking completely disheveled. The designer silk pajamas Evelyn wore were wrinkled and stained, a stark contrast to the impeccable facade she usually maintained. Chloe dragged two oversized suitcases onto the porch, her face puffy and red from weeks of crying over her ruined, fraudulent marriage. The deputies did not care about their designer clothes or their tears. They motioned for the two women to step off the property line so the changing of the locks could begin. Evelyn stepped onto the manicured front lawn and immediately launched into a spectacular theatrical performance. Sensing the eyes of the affluent black neighborhood upon her, she threw her hands into the air and began to wail. It was a calculated display designed to weaponize community solidarity. "Help us," Evelyn cried out, her voice carrying down the quiet suburban street. "Look what they are doing to a black family. The banks are throwing a mother and her pregnant daughter out onto the street like dogs. Where is the community? Where is the support? We are being targeted and destroyed by a greedy, faceless corporation." Several neighbors stepped out onto their porches, drawn by the screaming. Mrs. Jenkins, a retired schoolteacher who lived next door, walked down her driveway with her arms crossed. Mr. Hayes, a prominent local business owner, stopped watering his lawn and walked over, standing next to Mrs. Jenkins. A small crowd of neighborhood residents gathered on the sidewalk. Evelyn saw her audience and doubled down on the victimhood. "Mrs. Jenkins, please," Evelyn begged, walking toward the property line. "You know us. We are good people. My husband is fighting for his life in the hospital, and these heartless corporate monsters are stealing the roof over our heads. You have to help us protest this illegal eviction. Stand with us against this corruption." I opened the door of my SUV and stepped out onto the pavement, my heels clicking sharply against the asphalt. I walked across the street, moving directly into the morning sunlight. Evelyn froze. Her entire performance halted mid-sob as she realized the faceless corporation she was rallying the neighborhood against was standing right in front of her, wearing a tailored gray suit. Mrs. Jenkins did not look at Evelyn with sympathy. The older woman turned her gaze to me and offered a warm, respectful nod. "Good morning, Simone," Mrs. Jenkins said, her voice carrying clearly over the lawn. "We have been waiting to see you." Evelyn whipped her head back and forth between us, her confusion morphing into pure panic. "What are you doing?" she hissed at Mrs. Jenkins. "Do not speak to her. She is the one doing this to us." Mr. Hayes stepped forward, his expression stern and unforgiving. "We know exactly who she is, Evelyn. We also know exactly who you are." Evelyn took a step back, clutching her chest. "You do not understand. She is a traitor to her own family." "The only traitor here is you, Evelyn." Mrs. Jenkins shot back, her tone dripping with righteous disgust. "You think this neighborhood does not talk. We all know you forged Marcus' signature and stole his entire pension to give to that white criminal you forced your daughter to marry. We know you left a good black man to die on an operating table so you could go shopping at Phipps Plaza. You are a disgrace to this community." Evelyn gasped, looking around wildly at the faces of the neighbors she had always tried to impress. They were looking at her with absolute revulsion. "And for your information," Mr. Hayes added, gesturing toward me, "Simone is the only reason our community center is still standing. 6 months ago, when the city threatened to auction off the rec center due to massive tax debts, an anonymous donor paid off the entire lien in full. The bank manager told us last week that the donor was Vanguard Equity. Simone saved the neighborhood hub where our children play while you were busy stealing from your own husband. The neighbors turned their backs on Evelyn in complete unison, a silent, devastating rejection. They began walking back to their homes, leaving my mother and sister standing alone on the sidewalk, completely ostracized by the very people they had tried to manipulate. Evelyn's chest heaved, her last shred of social standing permanently incinerated. She opened her mouth to scream at me again, but the heavy rumble of a diesel engine interrupted her. A large white medical transport van turned onto our street, carefully backing into the driveway, right next to the sheriff cruiser. The rear doors of the van opened. A medical orderly stepped out and engaged the hydraulic lift, lowering a heavy-duty wheelchair to the pavement. Sitting in the chair, looking pale and significantly thinner, but very much alive, was my father, Marcus. He had a thick white bandage visible at the collar of his shirt, covering the surgical incision from his emergency bypass. He wore a simple gray tracksuit, staring at the house with hollow, exhausted eyes. Evelyn let out a sharp gasp, her eyes lighting up with frantic, desperate hope. The ultimate patriarchal shield had arrived. She sprinted across the lawn, completely ignoring the deputies changing the locks on the front door. She threw herself at Marcus' feet, grabbing his hands and weeping hysterically. "Marcus, thank God you are here," Evelyn sobbed, burying her face in his lap. "You have to stop her. Simone is throwing us out on the street. She froze our accounts and sent the police to kick us out. Tell her to stop, Marcus. You are the head of this household. Order your daughter to cancel this eviction right now and let your family back inside our home." I stood a few feet away, watching my father look down at the woman who had nearly killed him. Evelyn was clutching the fabric of his gray tracksuit, her tears soaking into the cotton as she babbled frantically about family loyalty and respect. She expected him to play his usual role. She expected him to be the passive peacekeeper, the human shield she could hide behind whenever her own toxic behavior finally caught up with her. She wanted him to turn around and order me to stop the eviction, to demand that I surrender my property back to her control. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not reach down to stroke her hair or offer her any false comfort. He just stared at the massive red brick townhouse that had served as the stage for her lifelong performance of fake wealth. He watched the county deputies finish drilling the new locks into the heavy oak front door, securing the perimeter of the estate. Then he looked at Chloe, who was still sitting on her oversized suitcases, looking at him with wide, expectant eyes, waiting to be rescued. Marcus let out a long, heavy sigh. He reached into the side pocket of his wheelchair and pulled out a thick manila envelope, resting it on his lap. Evelyn wiped her mascara-stained eyes and let out a breathless laugh of pure relief. "Oh, thank God," she cried, reaching eagerly for the envelope. "You brought the emergency funds. I knew you had a backup account, Marcus. I knew you would not let your wife and your pregnant daughter sleep on the street. We can use this to hire a defense attorney for Preston, and then we can counter-sue Simone for everything she owns." My father did not hand her the envelope. He simply let it drop onto the paved driveway right next to her knees. "Open it, Evelyn," he said, his voice raspy, but carrying an undeniable weight. Evelyn scrambled to pick it up, her hands trembling with greed. She tore open the flap and pulled out the thick stack of legal documents inside. Her eyes scanned the first page, and the triumphant smile completely vanished from her face. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking hollow and terrified. "These are divorce papers," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the morning breeze. "Marcus, what is this? This has to be a mistake. We have been married for 35 years. "There is no mistake," Evelyn, Marcus said, gripping the armrests of his wheelchair. "I signed them in my hospital bed yesterday. My attorney filed them with the county court this morning. We are finished." Evelyn dropped the papers onto the driveway as if they had burned her hands. "You cannot leave me!" she shrieked, her panic reaching a fever pitch. "You promised in sickness and in health. You took a vow before God to protect me." "I took a vow to a partner," Marcus replied, his tone devoid of any sympathy. "You are not a partner, Evelyn. You are a parasite. I spent 40 years breaking my back working double shifts in municipal management to provide a good life for this family. I built a pension so we could retire in peace. And you forged my signature to steal every single dollar I earned to give it to a white criminal simply because you liked the way his last name sounded at your country club dinners. I was trying to build generational wealth, Evelyn stammered, looking around wildly at the neighbors who were watching the scene unfold from their porches. I was investing in our future. You were investing in your own vanity, Marcus shot back, cutting off her pathetic excuses. You watched me collapse in that dining room. You knew my heart was failing. And instead of staying by my side while the surgeons cracked my chest open to save my life, you ran to a luxury mall to buy a $10,000 handbag with stolen money. You left me to die, Evelyn. If Simone had not paid the $50,000 surgical deposit, I would be in a morgue right now. You do not get to invoke God or vows after trying to trade my life for a designer purse. Chloe jumped up from her suitcases, her face twisted in anger. Dad, how can you do this to Mom? She yelled, stomping her foot like a spoiled toddler. She is losing everything, and you are abandoning her. You are abandoning me. I am your daughter, and I have nowhere to go. Marcus turned his exhausted gaze toward his golden child. His expression held no warmth, only deep, profound disappointment. You need to grow up, Chloe, Marcus said firmly. You are a 35-year-old woman still acting like a helpless child. You faked pregnancies to manipulate people. You stole your mother diamonds to pay off gambling debts. You married a man without knowing a single real thing about him because you were too busy taking pictures for social media. The free ride is over. Your mother ruined you by giving you everything you ever cried for, and I ruined you by standing back and letting her do it. I am not rescuing you today. You made your bed and now you are going to sleep in it. Chloe's mouth fell open, completely stunned by the harsh reality check from the man who had always quietly enabled her behavior. She looked at Evelyn, but Evelyn was too busy staring at the divorce papers scattered across the driveway to offer any comfort. Marcus signaled the medical orderly standing near the transport van. The orderly stepped behind the wheelchair and pushed Marcus away from Evelyn, moving him across the driveway until he was positioned directly in front of me. I looked down at my father. He looked fragile, his skin still pale from the major surgery, but his eyes were clearer than I had ever seen them. He did not look like the passive coward who used to hide in his office while Evelyn verbally destroyed me. He looked like a man who had finally woken up from a very long, very toxic nightmare. Simone, he said, his voice softening as he looked up at me. I owe you an apology. I owe you 1,000 apologies. I stood by for decades and let that woman tear you down. I let her make you feel like you were not enough because I was too weak to fight her. I convinced myself I was keeping the peace, but all I was doing was sacrificing your mental health to buy my own comfort. I am so incredibly sorry I was such a coward. I felt a tight knot form in my throat. I did not expect this. I had prepared myself for a lifetime of his passive silence. Hearing him acknowledge the abuse out loud, validating my reality in front of the entire neighborhood, shifted something heavy inside my chest. Thank you, Dad, I said quietly. That means more than you know. Marcus reached a shaky hand into the front pocket of his tracksuit. He pulled out a small velvet pouch and opened it. Resting in his palm was a rusted vintage safety deposit box key. The brass was tarnished, showing its age, and the number engraved on the top was barely legible. He reached out and pressed the cold metal key firmly into my hand, closing my fingers around it. I held on to this for 20 years, because I was afraid of what Evelyn would do if she found out. Marcus whispered, his eyes locked onto mine. I should have given it to you the day you turned 18, but I let my fear of her rage control me. I will not let it control me anymore. I looked down at the rusted key, then back up at my father. What exactly is this? I asked, my brow furrowing in deep confusion. Marcus took a deep breath, glancing over his shoulder at Evelyn, who was still weeping on the driveway. Then he looked back at me, his expression completely serious. This is the real reason your mother always hated you, Marcus said, his voice carrying a weight that made the morning air feel suddenly cold. Take that vintage key to the First National Bank building located downtown. The truth about who you really are is locked inside. The heavy brass key felt warm against my palm as my driver navigated through the busy downtown Atlanta traffic. I sat in the back of the SUV staring at the jagged teeth of the vintage metal. First National Bank was an old institution, a fortress of gray stone and marble that had stood in the financial district for over a century. My grandmother Beatrice banked there her entire life. She was brilliant. She was a force of nature, a woman who built her wealth during a time when black women were not even allowed to walk through the front doors of the establishments they cleaned. She started with a single hair salon and turned it into a commercial property empire. I always thought she lost her fortune before she died when I was 12. That was the story. Evelyn had drilled into my head. Your grandmother was a foolish woman who did not know how to hold on to her money, Evelyn used to say whenever I asked about her. Now I knew why my mother had tried so hard to erase Beatrice from my memory. The bank manager greeted me with respectful professionalism when I presented the key and my identification. He led me down a sweeping marble staircase into the subterranean levels of the building. The air grew cooler as we approached the massive steel vault door. He unlocked the outer gate and guided me down a long aisle of polished metal boxes. We stopped at a box near the bottom corner. He inserted his master key, turned it, then stepped back, allowing me to insert the rusted brass key my father had given me. The twin locks clicked in heavy unison. The manager pulled the metal drawer free, set it on a private viewing table in a secure room, and quietly closed the door behind him, leaving me entirely alone. The room was dimly lit. I took a deep breath, letting the silence of the vault settle around me. I reached out and lifted the heavy metal lid. The scent of aged paper and dried lavender filled the air immediately, bringing back a vivid memory of my grandmother sitting on her front porch. Inside the box rested a thick stack of legal documents wrapped in a brittle leather binder. I untied the leather strap and pulled out the top document. It was a last will and testament signed and notarized 20 years ago. As I read the pristine typewritten pages, the absolute truth of my lineage was laid bare. Beatrice did not lose her fortune. She had deliberately bypassed her own daughter. The legal language was sharp and unforgiving, perfectly reflecting the woman who wrote it. The document stated explicitly that Evelyn was to receive absolutely nothing from the estate. My grandmother despised my mother. Shallow social climbing vanity. She wrote that Evelyn cared more about proximity to white wealth than she did about building a legacy for her own community. She demanded real substance. Beatrice saw the toxic greed festering in her daughter and made a decisive choice to cut the rot at the root. She refused to let her hard work fund an empty lifestyle. I turned the page and my heart slammed against my ribs. The will did not just leave me a savings account. It left me the sole ownership of 7 prime commercial real estate properties spread across downtown Atlanta, shopping plazas, medical offices, and retail storefronts. The entire portfolio was placed into an ironclad trust, meant to transfer to me the second I turned 18. My grandmother recognized that I possessed her grit, her business sense, and her refusal to conform to Evelyn's superficial standards. She left her entire empire to the granddaughter she knew would actually build upon it, but I never received a single notification. I never saw a dime of this wealth when I was working 3 jobs to pay my way through college. I was betrayed. Evelyn had hidden the authentic will. She had used a corrupt lawyer to seal these documents away and bury the truth, keeping me deliberately impoverished while she paraded around town, pretending to be a self-made socialite. I dug deeper into the metal box, my hands trembling with a mixture of profound grief and escalating rage. Beneath the legal paperwork lay a heavy black leather ledger. I opened it. The pages were filled with meticulously recorded rent rolls and property management codes. Beside the ledger was a secondary stack of bank statements, stretching back 2 decades. I cross-referenced the property addresses from the will with the account numbers listed on the statements. The horrifying reality of my mother's actions crystallized in front of my eyes. Evelyn had not just hidden the will, she had illegally hijacked the property management company. For 20 straight years, she had been collecting the commercial rent from all 7 of my properties. She funneled the monthly revenue into a series of shadow accounts to fund her designer wardrobe, her luxury cars, and Chloe's extravagant lifestyle. I pulled out my phone and quickly ran the math on the monthly commercial lease averages for those specific downtown districts over a 2-decade period. The total was staggering. Evelyn legally owed me over $8 million in stolen back rent. She had committed massive-scale real estate fraud, wire fraud and theft of a beneficiary trust. My father was right. This was the real reason she hated me. Every time she looked at me, she saw the rightful owner of the wealth she was stealing. She abused me to keep my self-esteem so low that I would never question my place in the world or demand what was mine. I closed the heavy black ledger and placed it back into the metal box. A dangerous, lethal calm washed over my entire body. I had just taken everything from Preston for a fraction of this crime. Now I held the absolute power to send my own mother to federal prison for the rest of her natural life. The revelation inside the underground bank vault shifted my entire reality. I packed the authentic will and the heavy black ledger into my leather briefcase, leaving the cold metal room with absolute clarity. I had the legal power to destroy my mother completely. 2 weeks passed as my corporate attorneys meticulously verified the stolen commercial rent rolls, preparing the final federal injunctions. During that time, Evelyn and Chloe were formally evicted from the townhouse. With their bank accounts frozen and Preston wealthy family refusing their calls, they had been forced into a notoriously cheap rundown motel on the outskirts of Atlanta. I did not care where they went. I was entirely focused on reclaiming the commercial real estate empire my grandmother had built for me. A massive thunderstorm hit Atlanta late Friday afternoon, turning the sky a bruised purple and unleashing a torrential downpour across the city. I finished my final executive meeting at Vanguard Equity and took the private elevator down to the executive parking garage. The rain was blowing sideways, sweeping into the partially open structure. My private driver was waiting near the exit holding a large black umbrella. I adjusted the collar of my trench coat and began walking toward the sleek vehicle. "Simone, wait!" A desperate voice echoed through the concrete garage, cutting through the sound of the pouring rain. I stopped, turning slowly toward the shadows near the visitor entrance. Two figures stumbled out into the harsh fluorescent light of the parking structure. It was Evelyn and Chloe. They were completely unrecognizable. The designer silk dresses and flawless blowouts were gone. They were wearing cheap, wrinkled sweatpants soaking wet from standing out in the storm. Their shoes were covered in thick mud and their faces looked gaunt and exhausted. The reality of motel living had stripped away every single ounce of their fake aristocratic superiority. They rushed toward me, their cheap sneakers slapping against the wet concrete. My security driver immediately stepped forward, placing his hand inside his jacket, but I raised my hand to wave him off. I wanted to hear exactly what kind of delusion they had brought to my workplace. Evelyn threw herself forward, completely abandoning her pride. She dropped heavily onto her knees right in the middle of a massive puddle. The muddy water splashed against her sweatpants, but she did not even flinch. Chloe fell to her knees right beside her, weeping openly, the rain washing away her cheap mascara in dark streaks down her cheeks. "Please, Simone," Evelyn cried, grabbing the hem of my trench coat with trembling fingers. "Please, you have to stop this. We are living in a roach-infested motel. We do not have any money for food. My credit is completely destroyed and the police are looking for me regarding your father pension. You have made your point. You won. Please give us a second chance at being a real family." I looked down at the woman who had tormented me for 3 decades. "A real family," I repeated, my voice echoing coldly over the sound of the thunderstorm. "You mean the kind of family where a mother hides a legal will for 20 years and steals $8 million in commercial rent from her own daughter. You mean the kind of family where you funnel my grandmother hard-earned wealth into your luxury cars while telling me I am a worthless failure." Evelyn choked on her sobs, looking up at me with sheer terror as she realized I had found the vintage safety deposit box. "I did it for us," Evelyn pleaded frantically. "I wanted to maintain our status in the community. I wanted to give Chloe a chance to marry well. You were always so independent, Simone. You did not need the money like we did. I was just trying to protect our social standing." Chloe's head snapped toward her mother. The golden child stopped crying, her eyes widening in absolute horror as the truth finally clicked in her head. "You stole $8 million from her," Chloe shrieked, pushing herself up slightly from the wet pavement. You hid a fortune and let me marry a broke white criminal who faked his entire life. Evelyn reached out to grab Chloe's arm, but Chloe violently slapped her hand away. "Do not touch me," Chloe screamed, her voice bordering on complete hysteria. "You ruined my life, Mom. You raised me to be completely useless. You told me my only value was my looks and my ability to land a rich husband. You spoiled me until I could not function in the real world, and you hid millions of dollars that could have saved us. This is entirely your fault. We are sleeping in a motel room with bugs on the walls because you are a greedy, selfish monster." The absolute disrespect from her favorite child was the final breaking point for Evelyn. The desperate, pleading mother vanished, instantly replaced by the vicious, toxic abuser I knew so well. Evelyn's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She lunged forward, swinging her arm with all her remaining strength. Evelyn slapped Chloe violently across the face. The sharp crack echoed through the concrete parking garage. The sheer force of the blow sent Chloe tumbling backward. She crashed hard into the filthy puddle, her hands slipping on the wet asphalt. Her face splashed directly into the thick, dark mud. "You ungrateful little brat!" Evelyn roared, standing up and standing over her daughter in the pouring rain. "I sacrificed everything to give you a perfect life. I committed federal crimes to keep you in designer clothes, and this is how you repay me. You are nothing without me." Chloe laid in the mud, screaming and crying, grabbing handfuls of dirty water and throwing them blindly at Evelyn's legs. They were shouting over each other, tearing into one another with decades of suppressed resentment and toxic codependency. I stood perfectly still beneath the edge of the concrete overhang, watching them fight like wild animals in the dirt. I felt absolutely no anger anymore. The burning rage that had fueled me for weeks had completely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but cold, clinical indifference. They had finally become exactly what they always were on the inside: ugly, desperate, and entirely empty. I stepped forward, my designer heels clicking decisively against the pavement. "Stop," I commanded. My voice was quiet, but it carried a lethal authority that made them both freeze. Evelyn looked at me, panting heavily, while Chloe stayed huddled in the muddy water, sobbing into her hands. I reached into the interior pocket of my trench coat and pulled out a crisp white envelope. I held it out, extending my arm into the rain. Evelyn's eyes lit up with instant, desperate hope. She thought her violent display of dominance over Chloe had somehow proven her loyalty to me. She thought I was handing her a certified bank check, a lifeline, a way back into the comfortable upper-class world she had destroyed. She scrambled to her feet, wiping the mud from her hands on her ruined sweatpants, and reached out to grab the envelope from my fingers. Evelyn snatched the crisp envelope from my hand with greedy fingers. She did not care that her knees were soaked in muddy water, or that her favorite daughter was sobbing. She tore into the thick paper with manic anticipation. She was completely convinced I had brought a certified bank check to rescue her from squalor. She pulled out the folded papers. They were two standard employment applications for a local fast food franchise located exactly 2 blocks from their cheap motel. Evelyn stared at the bold logo printed at the top. Her face crumpled in profound confusion that rapidly mutated into absolute horror. She looked up at me, the rain pasting her ruined hair to her cheeks. "What is this?" Evelyn gasped, waving the applications. "Are you mocking me?" I looked down, feeling nothing but closure. "When I came to you 10 years ago begging for a tiny loan to cover my college tuition, you laughed in my face," I said, my voice slicing through the downpour. "You told me I was too plain and stupid to amount to anything. You told me I was only good enough to flip burgers while you drained my grandmother trust fund to buy Chloe luxury cars." I pointed at the wet papers. "Here is your chance to build some character, Evelyn. Minimum wage is $15 an hour. You better fill those out quickly before the night shift positions are taken." Evelyn let out a guttural scream. She scrambled to her feet, throwing the wet applications at my chest. "I will never work a fryer. I am a woman of high society. You are an evil, vindictive wretch." I just turned my back on her. My private security driver opened the rear door of the sleek black SUV. I stepped inside the dry, luxurious leather interior, and the door slammed shut, blocking out her frantic screaming. We glided out of the parking garage, leaving my mother and sister standing completely alone in the freezing rain, clutching nothing but fast food applications and their own toxic pride. Back in their cramped mildew, smelling motel room, the reality of absolute poverty set in. Chloe sat shivering on the edge of a stained mattress, wrapping a thin blanket around her shoulders. Evelyn paced the small room, furiously muttering to herself about lawsuits and hiring high-powered attorneys with money she absolutely did not have. The golden child illusion was completely dead. Chloe looked at her mother with pure disgust, finally realizing that Evelyn's obsession with status had driven them straight into the gutter. The loud buzzing of a cheap prepaid cell phone cut through the tense motel room air. Chloe grabbed the device from the chipped nightstand. The screen displayed an incoming call from a restricted number. She hesitated before answering, pressing the cheap plastic to her ear. "Hello?" she mumbled, her voice hoarse from crying in the mud. A frantic, hushed voice came through the receiver. "Chloe, listen to me very carefully." It was Preston. He was calling from a smuggled contraband phone inside the federal holding facility. "Preston," Chloe hissed, standing up and walking into the tiny, moldy bathroom to hide from Evelyn. "You left me with nothing. You ruined my life. I am sleeping in a motel with roaches." "I know, baby, I know," Preston pleaded, his voice dripping with the same manipulative charm he had used to trap her in the first place. "But I can fix this. I can fix everything for us. I have a secondary offshore account that the feds completely missed. There is $500,000 sitting in an untraceable crypto wallet. It is ours, Chloe. We can use it to get me out on bail and start over." Chloe stopped pacing. Her desperate materialistic brain latched onto the promise of hidden cash like a starving animal. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe that her life of luxury was not completely over. "How do I get it?" she whispered, gripping the phone tightly. "I need you to do one small thing for me," Preston coaxed, sensing her vulnerability. "I need you to buy a clean burner phone and smuggle it into the visitation room tomorrow afternoon. My lawyer is monitoring my calls and I need to execute the crypto transfer myself without a paper trail. Just get the phone to me, and I will wire $50,000 directly into a secure account for you by tomorrow night." $50,000. The number echoed in Chloe's head, erasing all logic and reason. She agreed without a second thought, completely oblivious to the fact that Preston was just using her as a disposable pawn one last time to save his own skin. The next afternoon, Chloe walked into the federal detention center wearing dark sunglasses and an oversized trench coat, hoping to look inconspicuous. Instead, she looked exactly like a nervous amateur preparing to commit a federal crime. The air in the facility was stale and oppressive, a stark contrast to the luxurious country clubs she was used to. The sterile white walls seemed to close in on her as she walked down the long, echoing corridor. She passed through the initial metal detectors, with the burner phone hidden deep inside a specialized compartment in her bra. She thought she was being clever. She thought her proximity to white wealth and her pretty face would shield her from consequence. She reached the crowded visitation room, where Preston was sitting behind a thick plexiglass partition, wearing a bright orange jumpsuit. Preston looked pathetic behind the reinforced glass. His arrogant posture was completely gone, replaced by frantic, desperate energy. A federal corrections officer stood near the doorway, watching the room with sharp, trained eyes. Chloe approached the partition, nervously glancing at the guard. She tapped the glass, signaling Preston. She reached into her coat, pulling out a folded $100 bill she had stolen from Evelyn's purse that morning. She walked right up to the corrections officer, batting her eyelashes and trying to deploy her usual manipulative charm. "Listen," she whispered, sliding the $100 bill onto the guard podium. "My husband just needs a quick minute with a cell phone. Just look the other way for 5 minutes and keep the cash." The corrections officer looked at the wrinkled $100 bill, then looked directly into Chloe's terrified eyes. The officer stared at her with absolute disgust. He had seen countless desperate family members try to bend the rules, but her blatant entitlement was staggering. He did not even bother to touch the money. He did not smile. He did not look away. He immediately reached for the heavy radio on his belt. "We have a civilian attempting to introduce contraband and bribing a federal officer," the guard announced loudly into the radio. 2 massive armed guards rushed into the visitation room, instantly grabbing Chloe by the arms. She screamed, dropping the burner phone as the cold metal of federal handcuffs slammed securely around her wrists. She realized too late that she had traded her freedom for a lie. The heavy steel doors securely locked behind her, permanently trapping her in the nightmare she had created. The heavy steel doors locking behind Chloe were just the beginning of her rapid descent into the criminal justice system. By the next morning, my cell phone rang with a frantic energy that could only belong to one person. I sat at my sleek desk at Vanguard Equity, sipping a freshly brewed espresso, as Evelyn's name flashed across the screen. I almost declined the call, but a deep, satisfying curiosity compelled me to swipe the green button. "Simone, you have to help us!" Evelyn sobbed into the receiver, completely abandoning any lingering shred of pride. Her voice was raspy and broken, stripped of all its former haughty arrogance. "Chloe has been arrested. They are holding her in a federal detention center without bail because she is considered a flight risk. You have to hire her a high-profile defense attorney right now. You have the money, Simone. You have the corporate lawyers. You cannot let your sister go to prison." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso, savoring the bitter, dark roast. I let the silence stretch over the phone line, forcing Evelyn to sit in the uncomfortable reality of her own making. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Evelyn." I said, my tone perfectly level. "You spent your entire life treating me like garbage. You hid an $8 million real estate empire that rightfully belonged to me. You allowed your golden child to fake a pregnancy and pawn your family jewelry. And now that she has committed a federal crime by attempting to bribe a corrections officer to aid a known fraudster, you want me to write a blank check to save her." "She is your blood," Evelyn wailed, desperate and grasping at straws. "She made a terrible mistake, but she does not deserve to be locked in a cage like an animal. You have won, Simone. You have the money and the properties. Just show a little mercy." "Mercy is for people who take accountability," I replied coldly. Chloe made her choices. She thought her pretty face and her proximity to a wealthy white man made her completely untouchable. She is about to learn how the real world operates. I am not paying a single dime for her defense. You better hope the public defender is having a good day. I hung up the phone before she could launch into another hysterical plea. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, feeling absolutely no guilt. The consequences of their actions were finally catching up to them, and I had front row seats to the finale. 2 months later, the swift wheels of the federal justice system brought us to the downtown courthouse. I did not come to offer moral support. I came to watch the final curtain fall on the golden child illusion. I walked into the crowded gallery wearing a sharply tailored charcoal gray suit, my posture completely immaculate. I took a seat in the back row, blending into the sea of spectators and legal clerks. Evelyn sat 2 rows ahead of me. She looked completely unrecognizable. The woman who once demanded the best tables at country club galas was now wearing a faded clearance rack dress, her roots showing gray, and her shoulders slumped in absolute defeat. She was trembling, clutching a crumpled tissue, twisting it nervously in her hands. The heavy wooden doors beside the judge bench opened, and Chloe was escorted into the courtroom. She was no longer draped in imported silk or carrying designer handbags. She wore a standard-issue tan prison uniform, her hands cuffed at her waist. Her hair was stringy and unkempt, her face pale and sunken. When she looked out into the gallery and made eye contact with me, her expression crumbled into sheer terror. She knew nobody was coming to save her. The trial was brutal and incredibly brief. The federal prosecutor did not need to paint a complex picture. The evidence was irrefutable. They played the high-definition security footage from the visitation room, showing Chloe sliding the stolen $100 bill across the podium. They played the audio of her explicitly offering a bribe to a federal corrections officer in exchange for allowing Preston to use a contraband burner phone. It was an open and shut case of bribery and attempting to aid a federal inmate. Chloe, public defender, a tired-looking man juggling 30 other cases that week, barely mounted a defense. He cited her clean prior record and asked for leniency, suggesting she had been manipulated by her fraudulent husband. But the judge, a stern woman who had zero tolerance for wealthy entitlement masquerading as victimhood, was entirely unimpressed. Chloe stood before the bench, trembling violently, as the judge looked down at her. "You walked into a federal facility and attempted to corrupt the justice system for personal financial gain. The judge stated, her voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. You believe the rules simply did not apply to you. That kind of arrogant disregard for the law requires a substantial consequence. The judge struck her gavel against the sounding block. I sentence you to 3 years in a state correctional facility with no possibility of early parole. The sound of that gavel hitting the wood was the loudest noise in the room. Chloe let out a devastating shriek, her knees giving out completely as the bailiff grabbed her by the arms to hold her upright. She looked back at the gallery, searching for a lifeline that did not exist. Evelyn's reaction was catastrophic. The reality of the sentence slammed into her chest like a freight train. Her golden child, the daughter she had worshipped and protected above all else, the daughter she had committed financial ruin to elevate, was now officially a convicted felon, heading to state prison. No, Evelyn screamed, a primal, agonizing wail that tore from her throat. My baby! You cannot take my baby! Evelyn tried to push past the wooden barrier, but a court officer immediately stepped in front of her, shoving her back. Evelyn collapsed onto the hard floor of the courtroom, exactly the way she had collapsed in the parking garage. She pounded her fists against the ground, weeping with a loud, uncontrolled desperation. I sat perfectly still in the back row, watching the scene unfold with cold indifference. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I watched Evelyn sob on the dirty courtroom floor, realizing the absolute totality of her destruction. She had lost her golden child to the prison system. She had lost her stolen wealth to my corporate takeover. She had lost her husband to a divorce he initiated. And she had lost her social status forever, becoming nothing more than a tragic cautionary tale in the elite circles she used to haunt. The bailiff forcefully guided a sobbing Chloe through the side door, the heavy lock engaging with a loud, definitive click. Evelyn wailed louder, curling into a pathetic ball on the floor, completely shattered and utterly alone. I left the echoing sounds of the courthouse behind me, stepping out into the bright, crisp afternoon. I did not look back at the heavy wooden doors or listen to the fading sounds of Evelyn weeping on the dirty floor. My focus was no longer on the wreckage my mother and sister had carefully built for themselves. They were exactly where their choices had led them. My energy was now directed toward the only piece of my biological family that had shown the capacity for genuine accountability. 2 weeks after the sentencing, I drove my vehicle up a quiet, winding gravel driveway, heavily shaded by towering Georgia pines. The dense tree line opened up to reveal a stunning single-story craftsman house sitting peacefully on the edge of a pristine private lake. The water mirrored the clear blue sky, offering a profound sense of isolation and safety. I had purchased the property in cash, ensuring it was fully paid off, and placed into an irrevocable trust specifically designed for my father. Evelyn could never touch it. Preston creditors could never place a lien on it. It was a fortress of absolute peace. I parked the car and walked up the stone pathway toward the wraparound wooden porch. Marcus was sitting in a sturdy rocking chair, looking out over the calm water. The transformation in his physical appearance was remarkable. The gray pallor that had haunted his face during the Thanksgiving dinner was entirely gone. He had gained back a healthy amount of weight, and the deep stress lines around his eyes had visibly softened. I was no longer the exhausted, defeated man who had collapsed, clutching his chest under the weight of Evelyn's endless demands. He looked like a man who had finally been allowed to simply breathe. He heard my footsteps on the wooden stairs and turned his head, offering a warm, gentle smile. He set down the book he was reading and gestured to the empty rocking chair beside him. I took a seat, letting the quiet sounds of the lake settle between us. We sat in comfortable silence for a long moment, watching a pair of herons glide across the surface of the water. There was no pressure to perform. There was no anxiety about maintaining a fake high society image. It was just a father and his daughter sitting in the truth. I saw the news about the sentencing. Marcus said, his voice low and steady, breaking the quiet atmosphere. 3 years is a long time, but it is the reality she created for herself. I am sorry it came to that, Simone. I looked at him, keeping my posture relaxed. It was not your fault, Dad. Chloe walked into that federal facility and made her own choices. Marcus shook his head slowly, looking down at his weathered hands. No, he disagreed firmly. It is my fault. Not the bribery, but the entitlement that led her to believe she could get away with it. I let your mother raise her to believe she was above the rules. And worse, I let your mother raise you to believe you were beneath them. He turned to face me, his eyes shining with a profound, heavy sorrow. We need to talk about my cowardice, Simone. For decades, I convinced myself that I was being a good black man by keeping my family together at all costs. I grew up in a generation where we were taught that presenting a united, successful front to the world was the ultimate goal. I let Evelyn's obsession with white validation and upper-class status dictate the culture of our home. I saw her breaking your spirit. I saw her hiding your grandmother legacy and pushing you into the shadows so Chloe could shine. I saw all of it and I did nothing. A single tear slipped down his cheek. I told myself I was keeping the peace. Marcus continued, his voice breaking with genuine raw emotion. But there is no peace in a house where one child is being actively destroyed. I was not a peacemaker, Simone. I was a coward. I was terrified of Evelyn's rage, and I sacrificed your mental health to protect my own comfort. You needed a father to stand up and shield you from that toxicity, and I failed you completely. I am so deeply sorry. I listened to his confession, feeling a tight, heavy knot in my chest slowly begin to unravel. It was the first time in my 32 years of life that my reality was entirely validated by a parent. He was not making excuses. I was taking absolute ownership of his failures. I reached across the space between the rocking chairs and placed my hand over his. I forgive you, Dad, I said, my voice steady and clear. I forgive you because you are willing to face the ugly truth of what happened in that house. But you have to understand that our relationship is starting completely over from scratch. The old dynamic is dead. We are going to build this new relationship with strict boundaries and absolute honesty. If we cannot have honesty, we cannot have a relationship. Marcus nodded, wiping the tear from his cheek. I expect nothing less, Simone. You set the rules. I will follow them. I am just grateful you are giving me the chance to know the remarkable woman you became without my help. After a while, Marcus gently pulled his hand away and reached down beside his rocking chair. He picked up a long cardboard tube. He popped the plastic cap off the end and carefully pulled out a thick, rolled-up document, smoothing his hands over the thick parchment paper. I have been holding on to something else, Marcus said, a small, hopeful smile returning to his face. I bought this years ago, right after I realized Evelyn had hidden your grandmother's will. It was my secret way of trying to make sure you had something of your own, even if I was too afraid to give it to you back then. He handed me the rolled-up paper. I took it, feeling the heavy weight of the document. I carefully unrolled the thick parchment, spreading it flat across my lap. I stared at the architectural blueprint and the attached county deed, feeling my breath catch in my throat. It was a land deed fully executed in my name. I instantly recognized the exact shape of the property lines. It was a pristine, untouched plot of land situated on a high ridge just outside the city limits. It was the exact spot where I used to sit in the grass as a little girl, sketching drawing after drawing of my ultimate dream home. Exactly 1 year later, the scent of roasted turkey and fresh herbs filled a dining room once again, but this time the air was completely devoid of suffocating tension. I stood in the center of my newly constructed modern estate, a sprawling masterpiece built directly on the pristine plot of land my father had given me. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the lake, reflecting the fiery orange and gold hues of the autumn leaves falling gently outside. It was Thanksgiving Day. 365 days had passed since I pushed my chair back from a table built on lies and tore down a fraudulent legacy. Today I was hosting a dinner built entirely on truth. My dining table was not surrounded by toxic relatives performing for social status. It was filled with my chosen family. Jordan, my brilliant business partner, was laughing loudly as he passed a platter of sweet potatoes to my lead corporate attorney. The security contractors who had protected me were sitting near the end of the table, trading stories and sharing genuine smiles. And seated right at the head of the table, where he truly belonged, was my father, Marcus. The transformation in him was nothing short of miraculous. The heavy gray exhaustion that had nearly claimed his life a year ago was entirely gone. He had gained his strength back. His posture was upright and his eyes sparkled with a profound, unburdened joy. He was wearing a handsome tailored suit, looking like a man who had been given a second chance at life. He raised his glass of sparkling cider, and the entire room quieted down to listen. "I want to give thanks today," Marcus said, his voice strong and steady. "I want to thank the people in this room for standing by my daughter when she needed an army. But most of all, I want to thank Simone. You did not just build this beautiful home. You built a safe haven for honesty. You gave me the courage to finally live in the light. To my daughter, the bravest woman I know." The room erupted in warm applause and the clinking of crystal glasses. There was no anxiety here. There were no fake pregnancies, no stolen ultrasound pictures, and no hidden bank accounts. There was only mutual respect and authentic, unconditional love. As the dinner plates were cleared and dessert was being served, a low murmur of a television drifted in from the adjacent media room. I had left it on a local news channel to provide some background noise. Jordan walked past the open doorway and suddenly stopped, his eyes glued to the large flat screen mounted on the wall. He gestured for me to come over, a slow, deeply satisfied smile spreading across his face. I stepped into the media room, standing beside him, as the local evening news anchor delivered a special update on one of the most high-profile fraud cases in Atlanta history. The screen flashed a courtroom sketch of Preston standing before a federal judge, looking completely defeated, his arrogant posture permanently erased. The anchor voice carried clearly through the speakers. Today, a federal judge handed down a severe sentence for former socialite and disgraced businessman Preston. Following his conviction on multiple counts of wire fraud and operating a massive Ponzi scheme, he has been sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Then the broadcast showed a brief clip that made me freeze in place. It was a shot taken outside a massive municipal building downtown. Pushing a heavy industrial mop bucket across the concrete plaza, wearing a faded blue janitorial uniform, was Evelyn. Her designer gowns and flawless blowouts were gone. Her hair was pulled back tightly under a hairnet, and she looked exhausted, scrubbing the dirty pavement under the harsh afternoon sun. The court had ordered her to pay back every single dollar of the stolen commercial rent she had hoarded for 20 years. The woman who had told me I was only good enough to flip burgers, the woman who believed she was meant to sit on a throne of elite white wealth, was now cleaning up trash to pay off a multi-million-dollar federal restitution order. I watched her push the heavy mop, wringing out the dirty water with her bare hands. I felt absolutely no pity. The universe had delivered the exact consequence she had earned. She was finally doing honest hard work for the first time in her miserable life. I turned away from the television screen, leaving the ghosts of my past behind me where they belonged. I walked back into the brightly lit dining room, where the sound of genuine laughter and warm conversation filled the beautiful space I had designed from the ground up. I walked over to the custom mahogany table and picked up my glass of expensive red wine. I looked around the room, taking in the faces of the people who actually loved me, who protected me, and who valued my mind over my compliance. I looked at my father, who was currently telling a joke that had the entire table erupting in joyful laughter. The heavy chains of generational trauma were permanently broken. I raised my glass slightly, bringing the crystal rim to my lips. I thought back to the words spoken exactly 1 year ago in a dining room that no longer belonged to them. I remembered the sheer disgust on Evelyn's face when she looked at me and tried to tear down my entire existence with a single cruel sentence. "They said I was not half the woman my sister is." I thought to myself, the memories holding no power over me anymore. They were right, because I am not half of anything. I am the whole damn empire. I smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached all the way to my eyes. I took a slow, satisfying sip of my wine, savoring the absolute perfection of the moment. I was completely and beautifully free. The warm light of the chandelier sparkled against the glass, and the screen faded to black. The ultimate lesson from this story is that your true worth is never determined by toxic family members who constantly belittle you. Blood does not automatically equal loyalty, and setting firm boundaries is absolutely necessary for your peace of mind. True empowerment comes from building your own financial independence and refusing to shrink yourself just to make others comfortable. When faced with relentless manipulation, the best revenge is simply creating a successful, untouchable life on your own terms, alongside a chosen family who genuinely respects you. Share your own experiences with setting boundaries in the comments below and subscribe for more.